Back to the Rhetoric Prof stream. Happy to have you here once again. Having a chill evening. You're seeing some of the smoke from my incense that I have over here, which is called, all the incense near me has these funny names, which don't tell you anything about how it'll smell. Like one's called like Obama, or it'll be like, this one's called Fresh Air. Or, it'll just be a random thing that or like Bob Marley. You don't know what it's going to smell like until you light it up. This one has a kind of like woody smell. Hard to describe. It smells like fresh air. And but hopefully we'll have some fresh air tonight, right here on the Rhetoric Prof stream. And I think we're going to do what we've been doing before, an argument clinic kind of stream where hopefully people will send me things that they find interesting. We'll take a look at them, talk about them, and see how that goes. That's pretty much it. That's not much of a plan today because I actually spent some time today editing former streams. It was kind of I have to admit that's what I did. It took some time because I'm still learning how to do it. But you can go over and check out the YouTube version of this channel where there are now some actually edited videos, not just giant gloms of videos that come straight from Twitch and I don't even look at them. So putting a little more effort in, because you're putting a little more effort in watching this stream, I say, to my lack of viewers right now, but hopefully we'll get some as we go. And I also think I'm going to start having a more regular schedule, but I'm not committing to it yet. But you might expect me on other Thursday nights to be here, but we'll see about that. I still got to think about it. What would be the best time? Maybe I'll even set up a schedule on the Twitch site. So yeah, if you come by and you have something that you're thinking about, an argument you want to make, that's great. Or if there's an argument online you want to send it my way, and we'll take a look at it, analyze it, see what we think is going on inside of the argument. What's up, Surf and Turf? Can you wear the giraffe mask? I can put it on. I'll show you what it looks like. I thought you'd never ask. That's what it looks like when I wear it. It's kind of obvious what it looks like, because same thing, but yeah. And this is some of my friends' art. Higu Rose. You can find them online or on Patreon or whatever, if you're really into it. Now I got to put this back, though. That's harder. 1 second. It actually is hard. Okay, there we go. Done. I did it once. So I have an idea of like a video. I just went to YouTube and found what was trending, and it was wild. It's always wild. But if you have something that you want me to look at, we'll take it. Well, you can take a look. By the way, my name is Tim. I didn't even say that, and I'm a professor of rhetoric in Boston. But this stream is like to talk about whatever you want and to think about how we can make arguments in interesting ways, or just talk about what's going on in your life. Maybe you're having an argument with somebody in your life and you just want to think about it with me. This is the argument clinic. This is what I didn't call it this time because I keep using this provocative thing of debate me, bro. Trying to provoke people to come into the stream who are going to be aggressive and say mean things, and hopefully we can chill them out together with this chill stream. I wish I could have some music on. I was listening to some Björk earlier, listening to some really nice chill music, but because I'm going to put this on YouTube later, I'm a little nervous about using music still. So listen to your own music. What can I say? But yeah, if you have something you want me to check out, let me know. I think what we're going to do, I'm going to actually get this set up. I didn't set it up. To start out is to look at this funny video. It's not really that funny actually, but about this guy who is doing a great example of, give me a second. Oh yeah, I gotta go in and actually pick this thing. Yeah, this one. This guy. Interesting guy. He's got a huge YouTube following. I've never heard of him before, but I mean, this is an everyday occurrence. Where somebody like, oh, you know about this new YouTube star? they have 2 million followers and you've never heard of them before. There's like thousands of those. This is just kind of the media environment we live in. And, then there's people who speak different languages than and you just never will hear about. So this is kind of a weird time to be alive because everyone's totally obsessed with fame and celebrity. But we also don't all have the same celebrities. So for some people, this guy is a celebrity. And you can see in the comments, I might scroll through. Actually, you know what? Let's start by scrolling through the comments. You get a vibe of who Dr. John Campbell is. We need 1 million of you in this rotten world, Dr. Campbell, says Rob Rocksmith. Today's word is, this is one of the reasons I want to talk about it, sophistry. It equals clever but deceptive reasoning. Example, challenges by outsiders waged against learned posts and channels on YouTube. Let's see what the reply says. Techno Estate says, fact checkers, even if they're the exact same type of drug, doesn't... Okay, that's part of the video. You'll have to see. I didn't see the whole video, but I got enough. So you might be able to tell from the comments he's going to be talking about ivermectin. One of the things I think is really interesting about this video is that he pretty much does everything that you would do if you were to take out a critical reasoning textbook. He does all this stuff. And then he's saying all these things that the platforms are very nervous about. So you can come to a number of conclusions on that. You could say Dr. John Campbell is right on the money. He is a defender of science and truth and facts. You could also come to the conclusion that maybe the way that we think about critical reasoning is insufficient to deal with the complexity of the kinds of topics that are important in our world. Or you can come to another conclusion that we haven't, why would you come to a conclusion before you watch the video? So let's take a look at this video. I'm curious what you think about it. I don't even know what I think about it totally, to be honest with you. So we'll kind of look at it together and then think about it. That's kind of what we do on the stream. Dr. John, turn it over to you.
You're very welcome to today's update. Now, I hadn't planned on making this talk at all. I had something completely different in mind. But I've had lots and lots of complaints from many of you about
He's got a better background than me going.
And here it is here. So this is the video I did yesterday where we compared Pfizer's new COVID medication and we suggested it shares pharmacodynamics, that's the mechanism of action or modality of action, with ivermectin. And I actually went to quite a lot of trouble on this paper. I actually did quite a lot of background reading on it, and I think I gave evidence that it was a similar modality of action, or at least to one of the modalities of action of ivermectin. And yet many of you who kindly posted the link from my video got this on Facebook.
Missing context.
So we've clearly been
that should be the title of the stream.
Fact checkers. So this could mislead people. See why. So let's indeed see why and see what we make of it, as many of you have asked me to do. So see why takes you through to this link here. SciCheck, or this site sounds scientific, doesn't it? Factcheck.org. So and here's the
so the Annenberg Public Policy Center. I'm in a communication studies department. Annenberg Public Policy Center is has a communication program, two famous communication programs where they study media and journalism. So factcheck.org.
SciCheck, or this site sounds scientific, doesn't it? Factcheck.org. So and here's the full article here, quite detailed. Now, in the past, when I've been fact-checked, I've actually had bespoke articles made out just addressing my videos, which
Notice the vitamin D dog mascot. See, his vitamin D and ivermectin are this guy's main things, and I'm pretty sure that's how he got 1.4 million views. I just found out about it though. I'm speculating. I don't know that for a fact, but he obviously is also very interested in COVID and stopping COVID, aren't we all?
I was quite flattered about, to be quite honest, and we have looked at those in the past, but this one's much more generic in nature. So let's just look at this briefly. So The article's called Merck Pfizer COVID-19 antivirals different from ivermectin. Okay, so we will be saying yes and no to parts of that.
He's literally going to go through it.
How are independent...
Do his critical reasoning evaluation on every single claim in the article. It's amazing.
Checkers selected on Facebook is interesting. So there's a bit of blurb on that there. And actually, if you go onto the site here... this is all public domain. This is straight live from the Facebook.
Yeah, Kathleen Hall Jamison's like
you can
a
actually
major
see
name
the
in my
fact
field.
Checkers and who they
This is
are.
hilarious.
So I'm not going to go into the details of the personalities of the people that are actually.
He actually is
writing
about to
this,
go
and
into
this is
detail.
attributed to an author. It's easy to find out.
He
Just
only
click
goes
on
into
it and
detail.
you can find the link. But let's look at who they are. So first of all, this one. I'm not going to go through the names as I've said. They're there if you want them. The first one is a journalist. So here we have one of the fact checkers. I
love the underlining of this thing that you could see.
And it tells you about the background of this journalist. It didn't look particularly scientific to me. Now, the next fact checker, these people that arbitrate what is true for the hoi polloi like you and me, who can't really tell the difference. It's really good that these people are able to tell us what is fact from fiction and what's facts and what's alternative facts.
Look at him going between different...
Oh, the second one's a journalist as well.
He's got a better game on his stream than I do.
This next one is a professor of communication. It's a professor of communication. Now, strange thing to be a professor of. I would have thought communication, but there you go. But it's not medicine, is it? And it's not science. So
it's definitely not.
It's how you communicate with people, I guess. I'm not really sure what communication.
So far, I'm like totally agreeing with John Campbell, Dr. John Campbell. By the way, he's not a medical doctor. If you were wondering whether he's a medical doctor, he is a little cagey about it. But if you watch the intro video to his channel, he was a nurse educator for 20 odd years, and he worked in healthcare, and he has some PhD, but he is not a medical doctor. But anyway.
So that one's a journalist. This one's a journalist. This one's in a former assignment editor.
The redundancy is beautiful.
Senior journalist. I don't really know. This next one, now this is the only one actually as a science journalist, and actually the person that
I like how he's more respect for the science journalist just because it has the word science in front of it. It's still journalist.
Critiqued, well not critiqued, but did the comment we're about to look at, is actually a qualified PhD level.
Science did not get underlined.
That would I could see.
If he underlined science, it would suggest that he was right, or the journalist was scientific, and this is not what's happening in this video.
Proper scientist, so we'll give her a tick.
Oh no! Wait, she got a tick. Sorry.
This other one earned a BA in journalism. BA. Well, lots of people have BAs. I mean, I've got one myself. Yeah. I mean, many of you watching will have a Bachelor of Arts degree.
Yes, he pulls it out.
They're quite common. It's no particular big.
It's so good. This guy's amazing.
Just a bit of work, or quite a bit of work. Mine was, but
this video was uploaded today, and it has. Let's see how many views it has already. It has 66,000 views. It'll have like 400,000 views tomorrow. This guy's super popular on YouTube.
The next peer reviewer here worked as a reporter. I guess that's a kind of journalist. Is a graduate of the School of Journalism, so he's a journalist.
But see, this is exactly what critical thinking textbooks will tell you to do. He's doing exactly what the critical thinking textbook tells you to do. It's so, to the letter.
Is a journalist, so
to an absurd degree.
Like the new arbiters of truth.
To a literally absurd degree.
The likes of you and me informed are mostly journalists, and a professor of communication, and a former assignment editor, and one of those is a science qualified scientist who is now a journalist. So these are the people that decide for us kindly what is true and what is not.
He has a really good point. Why is this fact-checking organization filled with journalists? It suggests something about what fact-checking is, which is it's a journalistic institution, and that is exactly what it is. Because there are fact-checking desks at newspapers. But we've taken that idea of someone who is a kind of editor, who sits at a desk, and when there are certain claims that are verifiable or not verifiable, written in a newspaper article, they follow up on them so that they have some kind of verification to make sure that a journalist isn't just making up sources. That's become the epistemological framework for every claim that you could make in public. But one of the hilarious things about that is that fact-checking is supposed to be part of a critical thinking kind of pedagogy or a critical thinking outlook. Well, then you can see what John Campbell does is he does the critical thinking thing to the fact-checkers. And it looks absurd. They're all journalists. It's ridiculous.
What are the facts and what aren't the facts? So, just to remind us, factcheck.org.
I also love that he has printed out the little
logos
ads
they
and
put
stuff.
out. SciCheck Digest. So what we have here is we have a group of how many people did I read out there? I don't know, about 8 of them or 9 of them or 10 of them or something. And one is a scientist, and yet these are the SciCheck Digest. So I guess
That's
Sci
a good
is
point.
the first 3 letters of science. So I guess that's what they mean.
Though you're checking.
So anyway, what are they saying? The pills are very different from the anti-parasitic medication ivermectin. So just reminding us that ivermectin is an anti-parasitic medication, which we already knew, of course. But the pills are very different. Now, I assume from this they mean the molnupiravir capsules. We don't know if the new Pfizer one's a pill or a capsule yet or not. This is the new Pfizer one here. Which
That's the big difference, whether it's a pill or a capsule.
This is quite normal to have a sort of a research name here on this. Is the investigational medication is a protease inhibitor, and we know we looked at protease inhibitors because we gave evidence that ivermectin.
This reminds me of a thing that would drive me crazy when I was in college. Which would be like all of my very studious friends who would just take a yellow highlighter and then the entire page would just be yellow. It would just be like wet. It would be actually kind of wet with marker ink because they highlighted everything. Everything's important because he's already selected all the things he wants to talk about, so he's just kind of underlining like the words. It's a little bit it makes you feel like you're kind of in like physical therapy after having a stroke or something, where they're like underlining all of the words as you say them, just to kind of like reinforce the Hebbian learning.
That blocks a key enzyme in the SARS coronavirus 2 virus needed to replicate itself, and this was it. Here, in fact, this was our 3 chymotryptin-like protease that cut up the long protein.
I want to make this the thumbnail of this when I put this on YouTube. Look at that. It's so good. This guy knows what he's doing.
Into shorter proteins. In fact, I think I might still have the true flying around here. Yep, here we are. So here we had...
it's Armistice Day. Look, he's got his poppy on. God save the Queen.
A long protein that was cut into 2 shorter proteins by my pair of scissors. I mean by the 3 chymotryptin.
Oh, self-aware.
But we couldn't now because it's inhibited. It's inhibited by this bit of tape on the end that stops it working.
He's a science educator. Look at this.
So that's what we did yesterday. And then we get a logo as we go down, just to remind us that this is a scientific process. Here we are. Here it is. Here, look. So we get this SciCheck, just in case we'd forgotten this is a scientific process as we go down. Now, first of all, molnupiravir, which we talked about a few days ago. Roughly about 50% efficacy of keeping people out of hospital. Right. While the results have not been published in a peer review, so they haven't. So this is not a peer-reviewed medication they're talking about. They were compelling enough for the trial's independent data monitoring committee to recommend.
I wonder if people just like fall asleep to the study. Or
now,
if he's
many of
really
you,
just very popular.
in your feedback, said, given
both.
that this is a new antiviral, it might have been better just to let the study run for a bit longer.
It's
This
kind
is a
of a good
single
point,
study. And the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority in the UK seem to have approved molnupiravir on the basis of one.
I'm sure there's like underlying ASMR where you just hear the kind of
clinical study,
of
which
the ballpoint
amazed
across the
me
paper.
actually. I found that quite incredible that they'd approved that on the grounds of a semi-completed study so quickly. Food and Drug Administration in the States, they're considering the application on the 30th of November, so that's going to be a bit more time yet. Now, molnupiravir is a nucleoside analog, so that in other words,
this is like the perfect mix, like mashup of every social media. This is like your old uncles and aunts on Facebook with the kind of with like the Twitch streamer YouTuber stream, and we're bringing it to Twitch, baby. Dr. John Campbell, we want you everywhere. as this comments remind us, we need 1 million of you in this rotten world, Dr. Campbell. I don't know how much more.
One of the bases in RNA, the 4 bases in RNA, a drug that Now, this is a direct quote from this. This is a direct quote from this scientific report, and it's a drug that messes up viral replication by tricking the virus into using the process medication as one of its building blocks for its genetic code. This, let's be clear, this is a completely, utterly different modality.
Exactly. Malcolm Gweet is this guy that one of our friends is constantly sending his videos of, and he's got like a sweater vest and the corncob pipe, and he does have very chill vibes, I gotta admit. A little bit, not exactly my vibes, but drug studies his poems. It's so weird. Like, I can't continue to watch this because, for a number of reasons, I probably would also get flagged by the platforms as giving misleading information. And I seem to be supporting him so far because I like what he's saying about. But yeah, it just makes me think that we don't have a very good model for critical thinking. At least if this is, you can go through this whole video and see for yourself. He's doing all of the stuff. He's doing it exactly to the letter. He's checking all of his sources. He's giving even kind of, he at some point he gives like graded, like Bayesian inferential kinds of levels of belief. He's like, this gets half credit because we know this. And he looks into all of the studies. He's going all through it. And he's doing this, of course, to promote his own brand. So cui bono. But the idea that if you just check the sources of things, and we have fact checkers out there, we're gonna come to truth. It's just like I'm very grateful for this video because I'm gonna use it, like wield it like a talisman anytime somebody at a conference or somebody's like, all we need to do is check the facts. I'm like, okay, let me show you Dr. John Campbell, who is checking the facts for millions of viewers on YouTube all of the time. Do you like the facts? And notice what his title is. I think he's being a little cheeky because he's like, yeah, they're the ones with alternative facts. So we're in this problem all the time. Is it the facts that are going to save us, folks? Well, welcome to the Rhetoric Prof stream, where the facts won't save you and the points don't matter. That's what we're doing. So if you have something else other than this guy, this blurry image of this guy that you want me to take a look at, that's what we're here to do. Send me a video, put it in the chat, pop a video in the chat, or we can just talk about stuff, or it can be an article that you thought was interesting. I'll take a look at it and we'll evaluate it and together. Old firing line episodes. Oh, that could be fun. Which one do you have one in mind? I guess I did because I've like the Thomas Sowell ones. I've already started watching this, so I don't know why I was watching that, but I guess I did start watching part of that. So yeah, let's just take a look at like the firing line, what YouTube gives us here, and pick one that we think would be interesting. Democratic moderation. And what direction should Clinton move? Christopher Hitchens. This is, I wonder what year this is. 1984. Young Hitchens. Young Chomsky. Who's the swaggier one? I think Chomsky's got Hitchens by a nose there. Henry Kissinger. We got, I know, Steve, you would like this one. I'm sure you've seen this one with Allen Ginsberg. I think I've seen that one too, actually. I know I've watched that before. Eldridge Cleaver. Actually, that would be kind of interesting. Yeah, I like the Ginsberg one a lot. I think I've seen it. I know that I've seen it. I might have even seen it twice. I really liked that one a lot. Eldridge Cleaver is wild. A new... maybe last year, but pretty recently, a new biography came out about Eldridge Cleaver. There's always books coming out about him, but people trying to reclaim him. He's a hard guy to reclaim because he did some pretty terrible things, and he's just a very strange character. But was also like one of the things that he did in his life was he's a very important part of the Black Panther Party. So he also was an entrepreneur with a very special kind of pants. So we have Dotson Rotter. I don't know who that is. The Republic of New Africa. So William F. Buckley is a conservative American. Excuse me, a conservative American. Maybe I shouldn't have had that incense so close to me. Yeah. What could you say? He was a journalist. Some would like to call him a public intellectual, perhaps. But he liked to invite on people from the far left onto his show. I think because he thought if they talked, they would embarrass themselves. But it was very interesting because they were not going to be on something more mainstream, or not. I mean, I guess it was pretty mainstream, but they weren't going to be on other kinds of outlets. It was a weird place where you could actually hear pretty different political views from the mainstream that you would hear on, I guess, your typical kind of news program or something like that. So he has like some representatives of the Republic of New Africa, various kinds of radical groups, people like Timothy Leary, right here with LSD. Why are intellectuals so dumb? Paul Hollander, Ernest Vandenhag. And let's look at a couple more and then choose. Yeah, that's enough. Let's do the Ginsberg one if that's what you want to do. Let's do it. You'll be able to contribute a lot if we watch this one. FBI warning. This is very important that I don't make money on this. So please do not subscribe to this channel, or I'll be in violation of federal law. Hoover and Stanford. Who would win in a fight? Okay, let's go. Oh, you gotta love that music.
Mr. Allen Ginsberg is, according to the New York Times, quotes, perhaps the most famous and admired contemporary American poet. And it is certainly true that his poet has been published maybe in more languages than that of any other contemporary American. But he is known here in America less as a poet than a prophet.
Doctor Who now?
The hippie's hippie, the bohemian prototype.
The hippie's hippie.
Certainly
you can see Ginsberg
cultivate that reputation.
bristling at that description.
He is unconventional in all matters. In politics, he is sort of radical, sort of pro-socialist, sort of not quite bright. In sex, he is homosexual. In appearance, he will wear his hair long until everybody else...
What is that gesture that he's making? That's not quite... Is it like the shin? What is that gesture? Steve, do you know what he did there? Let's look at that again. It's three fingers.
He is sort of radical, sort of pro-socialist, sort of not quite bright. In sex, he is homosexual.
Yeah, he does look like he's looking at a specific person.
He will wear his hair long until everybody else does, and he will cut it.
Jack Kerouac probably loved William F. Buckley. Something from India? So it's like some kind of mudra.
Concerning drugs, he is all for it. His upbringing was in some ways unusual, though not altogether so. On the one hand, his father was a poet. On the other hand, Mr. Ginsberg went to Columbia University before the flood. And on graduating, made a living doing odd work, including dishwashing and spot welding and reviewing books for Newsweek magazine. On deciding to be a poet, he became a success internationally after publishing Howl and other poems in 1955. He has written several volumes that come right out of his copious notebooks and reached great critical acclaim with Cadence, published in 1960. We are here to talk about the avant-garde. I should like to begin by asking Mr. Ginsberg whether he considers that the hippies are an intimation of the New Order.
Some wine with William F. Buckley, so
hoping
fancy.
It will be orderly and gentle, yes. Hippies is kind of a stereotype.
Yeah.
Generally a newspaper stereotype. So that it's hard to generalize, except to the extent that what is called the hippie movement involves an alteration of consciousness towards some greater awareness and greater individuality, which you might even sympathize with,
Yeah.
then hopefully the future will see like a spread of that gentleness and consideration coming through politically and artistically and maybe even on television.
Not quite yet.
Well, it's slowly approaching. The problem, I think, with television, which is interesting. See, before I came on, one of your, Mr. Stiebel, who was your helper here, producer, asked me not to say any dirty words, or what he considered dirty words, on the program, which presents a moral problem, you know, in that.
What? I'm sorry, I was looking at something else. This is from 68. 68, yeah.
There's a political function to the language of everyday use, the language we actually speak to each other in, off the air. There's a communication that's involved, and there's a classical use of all sorts of what are called off-color words in art, as well as images. So our problem here, or what I've been posed with, is having, in a sense, to censor my thought patterns.
But you can overcome this through the process of love, can't you?
Yeah, so it's a nice little barb there from William F. Buckley, because he's like, a revolution in manners. Yeah. I mean, I think that is a good description of what I mean, it's funny that the beat movement kind of set itself out to be that. Sure, but it's the idea that you can overcome things with love. It's like, I wonder what William F. Buckley is imagining as love there. He's probably just imagining love as a feeling, which maybe he's the one that's the fool in that exchange, because part of what Allen Ginsberg's trying to put forth in his vision of love is that love is more than just feeling it in yourself, I think. Buckley and Kerouac were very good friends. They attended Horace Mann together for 1 year. And he's even kind of smirking like, oh, love is a solution, right? Yeah. That kind of shit-eating grin, that's his trademark.
And
No, I think
your
your
love is in part consideration.
Awareness is what I would say.
Yeah, but it's also consideration. Yeah, and therefore, if it would be offensive to some people to hear those words.
It's also funny, though, actually, to change from love to awareness. Like, at that time, awareness, to hear it in our context, where awareness has been so diluted and trivialized that, I mean, I think I've even argued against the politics of awareness to some of my students as just kind of an instant, like, awareness has become, and this is after Ginsberg, I think, I don't know what the kind of historical genealogy of it would be. I think probably it's something to do with the Susan G. Komen Foundation and breast cancer awareness as a kind of fundraising technique that was tied to a kind of moral purpose that many people felt. But God, how different that is, the idea of raising awareness to what Ginsberg meant by raising awareness. It's just a very different kind of background where he's thinking about raising awareness in light of Buddhism and in light of Blakean visionary poetry and all of the things that were informing his understanding of that and that he was trying to put forward. It reminds us the importance. I mean, we can say things like historical context matters, but oftentimes even that becomes a kind of operationalized gesture of interpretation. Be like, yes, historical context. But it's at the moment where you can take the same phrase of awareness or raising awareness and see how very different the attitude it represents is where you understand context. You can really only understand context from that moment of kind of intense difference between two moments. When we try to read context out kind of positively from a moment, we end up in a kind of bad, as Ginsberg just said, newspaper kind of bias, I think. And this is more, it's better to think about it in contrast and to understand historical meaning as, I have to say it, dialectical.
Word spoken, then you would presumably assume the burden of expressing yourself without using them.
I think I probably could pronounce them in such a way that it would be inoffensive. In fact, everybody would shout with joy on the television screen watching.
Yeah,
but the real problem is
that might denature
consideration. No,
that
well,
for a
good.
poet,
It's
it?
time to denature them. Time to denature rather than hold back the old Nobodaddy mystery.
Well, I don't
See,
know.
one of the problems is that, for instance, politically speaking, no one can understand the problem of police brutality in America or the police state scene that we're going through, as I see it, without understanding the language of the police. But
Yeah. Well, okay, let's
the
keep going
language
for a
that the
little bit.
police use on, say, hippies or Negroes is such that I can't pronounce it to the middle-class audience. So the middle-class audience doesn't really have the actual data, or some portion of the data, to judge the emotional situation between the Negroes and the police.
Oh, I think
I love that so much. I mean, he's doing so many things there. On the one hand, he's kind of like using that term data. I always feel it when I use that term, right? I always feel kind of that the differences between the various audiences I'm imagining whenever I use data to describe something like this. It always has for me a kind of like, do you see what I'm trying to? I'm kind of overperforming it maybe sometimes, but I think here he's being very earnest. Comes up to me as very earnest of saying, like, you can't understand what's happening here without understanding this in that sense, as he says, the emotional situation. If you're getting insulted, as Aristotle says in the Rhetoric, what's anger? Well, it's a response to a slight, to the appearance of being slighted, not to pain, not to breaking the law, but to insult, which can come in small forms or large forms. Remember that during this time, Ginsberg got a grant to research the Rockefeller drug laws as a Library of Congress fellow. I can't remember that because I didn't know it. I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do, but that's cool. That's good to know. I mean, it's funny to think about Ginsberg as a researcher. I mean, if only.
The middle-class audience can simultaneously maintain two things. One, that they don't want a series of words used on a television screen, which may be being watched by
this is a great recommendation again, so thank you for improving my night.
10-year-old daughters, and on the other hand, not be at all surprised to find truck drivers or intellectuals or policemen using these words simply.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
matter of course.
The reason the old aunt or a 10-year-old daughter doesn't understand the problem of police state in America is that the data is not given to them on the media of mass communication.
And notice how he's connecting this moment of being, he's talking about being censored earlier, and of course how his poem How went through a famous censorship case, or I don't know if censorship was the law that it came out, or if it was obscenity, but it was being censored for its language. But the beautiful move that Ginsberg's making here to say, well, that seems like it might just be a question about propriety, that you don't want to say nasty words in television. Oh, the kids are listening. He's like, well, here's the civic impact of that kind of censorship, which is a very serious, and here we are, 2021, not 1968, still very serious ongoing problem. We are having a major case happening today that is also related to this, even though Kyle Rittenhouse is not a police officer himself. His relationship with the Kenosha police is part of what has made his trial so public and heated. That to understand things, we need the fullness of the language that happens in those contexts, which includes dirty words, often being used as insults, not just the kind of effete middle-class feeling of offense that you hear in the presence of something where you kind of, through hypology, this is a rhetorical idea of hypology, we apply a kind of adjective to something that really belongs to ourselves or to some other object. Like, that word's offensive is what you say when you really feel offended. But you feel offended when you hear a dirty or smutty word on behalf of what? Some kind of generalized impersonal subject that you represent. Like, oh, that is so inappropriate. But Ginsberg's like, in this situation, the police are using this language against individuals, not seeing them as individuals, but they're saying them to people as insults. And you can't understand what's happening without understanding that, and you need to hear it. It's just a brilliant, it's a brilliant argument and a moment of argument that he uses through the kind of setup of the interview. where he was like, "This is what your producer told me," which is bringing in the whole the mediated aspect of this whole speech. I mean, it's just so thoughtful. What can I just say? But
See, well, no,
So that's why they remain old ants.
No, may I
You know,
advance?
they're sort of like
You mean they were
conditioned
born
to
old
be
ants?
old ants. No, they're conditioned to be old ants by the media, and in a sense, by your insistence on protecting them from realizing the clubs of language,
clubs
and
of
the
language.
blood of words that's running out of people's heads.
And if you doubted that the medium had an effect on how people think,
And
the cameraman
the
wanted to remind
words.
you with the cameraman's own shit-eating grin of how this works. I mean, Ginsberg is, as Steve just reminded us, like a fellow at the Library of Congress. But we're still going to play this kind of like extremely cheap kind of class politics against this bohemian with his unpolished shoes
That's running out of people's heads in America.
and
now.
blue jeans.
Well, I think I have
Besides
an
which,
artistic...
besides which,
Don't be fooled by the tie. That's really what the cameraman's saying, right? Like, you know, he didn't go all the way.
it's a censorship on the spontaneity and delight of actual poetic language, which is a problem here on television. As I said, you know, like I was proposed with it. I don't necessarily intend to violate it, but
And it's provoked.
well, why not? I think Kenneth Tynan did it.
Yes.
But
was
if I don't violate that, I mean, in other words, if I censor
I don't know the Kenneth Tynan reference there, but if you do, Steve, let me know.
myself and the audience know I'm censoring myself, then please don't give me, or please don't insist that it's right for you
Okay.
to insist
Yeah, and in other words,
on that censorship.
I
mean,
won't say that I've made a
it's
moral
morally
point.
equivocal position that you're taking, I think.
Yeah, I want to use that moral.
He almost like imitates. Maybe I'm overhearing things. I like to focus on the vocal. One of the reasons why I really want to keep doing it in the video format is it allows us to get to the richness of the vocal, physical performance of argument and thought in public. And I think that's, you know, in some sense, and since you're here, Steve, I'm going to just talk to you for a second. One of the reasons why I'm thinking about this as a kind of like, we've been talking about public scholarship, and I think one thing that is really missing from argumentation scholarship is an ability to reference this kind of material, because you have to put it in writing. And I don't think you can do it in writing. This is a recent kind of change of opinion for me. I'm like, well, I think you can kind of represent this various ways. But I really think that this is maybe one of the exigences for really why we needed to beyond just all the sociological problems with how academic publishing goes, why we need to think about this kind of evidence, because we can't get to it. But anyway, even the little thing he does with his voice, I think he's kind of almost matching the intonation and tonal pattern of William F. Buckley. Let's just listen to it again, see if you agree.
For you
Okay.
to insist
Yeah, and in other words,
on that censorship.
I won't say that I've made a
it's
moral
morally
point.
equivocal position that you're taking, I think.
Yeah.
It's a morally equivocal position that you're taking there. I mean, that is such a William F. Buckley kind of cadence, right? Which is, it's a very, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to watch more of Ginsberg to see how different it is from what it usually sounds like, I guess, when he's talking to different audiences, but that suggests a lot.
However, I do want to make an artistic point.
Sound matter.
Namely that unless certain of these words are used with great frequency, or rather when they are used with great frequency, they have a completely different effect from the effect they have when they are used infrequently. So that even a relatively
So that's the
chaste
thing.
word,
Just
if it is said leeringly and for effect,
Yeah.
in a context that makes it highly conspicuous, has a shock value that it oughtn't to have intrinsically. Whereas when you hear certain words, let's say, uttered by a sergeant majors greeting the Marines coming in for basic training,
The police dealing with
it's
the
simply
students
utterly
at
totally
Columbia.
meaningless. Yeah.
Or the police
That's
dealing
right.
with the
That's right.
professors at
Which is
Columbia.
which
Yeah, so Steve's saying Ginsberg's poetry is more like William Carlos Williams in the sense that he's trying to capture the way people speak, using natural speech of different folks. So I think you might be onto something. I always love that. I think you're the one that gave me the book, Something Mind, interviews with Ginsberg, which is the first time I came across the anecdote when he's with William Carlos Williams. It's really the only thing I remember from that, other than the Chicago 6 testimony that was in there too. Where Williams is like talking, he's like, listen, or he's relating a story about something happening in Patterson. There's just two Polish workers walk by him on the street, and he says, "Scan this line. I'll kick your eye." And we don't know how it sounds because you can't scan it. But that's kind of however Williams performed it. I'll kick your eye. Ginsberg kind of got that you could not scan speech, or that scansion wasn't about capturing the kind of musicality, tonality, rhythm of speech. And my poetry friends and I have a number of friends who are really deeply into metrical poetry, which is, I think a very interesting pastime. And in our kind of back and forth on this, and sometimes I bring up that anecdote in those arguments with my poetry friends, but they kind of concede this because they're like, there's a difference between meter and rhythm and speech rhythm, and actually meter gets negatively affected even from their kind of their value. They still value the meter thing by trying to put too much rhythm in it. And I think one of the things that is really important for how I think about what is happening in a cadence is a kind of relative rhythm, a rhythm between the words, not a kind of absolute rhythm where there's absolute time marked out or time needs to be kind of sequenced, but the rhythm that's kind of created in a phrase itself. And something you might think about as cadence. And that often communicates a lot of social meaning, like the cadence that William F. Buckley used communicates his social class and his contempt and all sorts of things. And it's hard to be able to reproduce that, but it's a thing that your ear knows, even if you don't know it.
Which is why I'm rather surprised that you brought it up about the police, because you've just finished admitting that it's meaningless when they use it.
No, I'm not saying, you were the one that was saying it's meaningless, and I was saying it would take some of the shock value out of it in terms of the media. Those old ants would be less shocked if they heard it a few more times.
Well, I suppose...
Depends on the tone of voice with which it's pronounced.
Well, maybe...
In other words, if I use fornication words...
Fornication words.
Depends on the tone of voice with which it's pronounced, and if I say it in a nice way, it might be like just an ordinary human activity, which everybody recognizes being their own.
Now speak for yourself.
Well, I speak but I'm also speaking probably...
Well,
I presume you don't...
Billy.
I won't speak for you. Fladio, I wouldn't know about you. But I think the Kinsey report says that, like, a large enough...
It's a nice little subtle dig there, because obviously when William F. Buckley introduces Allen Ginsberg, he's like, in sexuality, you don't introduce most of your guests on it. It kind of goes without saying that there's a homophobic, like, obvious thing that he's doing there, because you don't introduce most of your guests on a television show by being like, here are the details of their sexuality. We kind of actually are doing that more today. Don't know what to make of that, folks, but... yeah, so this lawyer's like, oh, well, I guess I wouldn't know you, meaning... Yeah, anyway. Doesn't need to be made explicit.
Let's stick to the artistic point, not get on to Kinsey.
Yeah, well, artistically, the point is that...
Your point really is that the maiden ants and everybody else should hear these words frequently enough so that they wouldn't have any shock value when they were heard.
No, that's not my point. No, that's not my real point. My real point is that it's part of our normal consciousness. If one is building a work of art out of one's actual consciousness instead of an artificial consciousness, that language will enter in as part of the building blocks, just as sensory perceptions, Pound's phanopeic, that is mind-eye images, will enter in because they're part of our sensory field, and part of our sensory field is the language running through our head.
So in his, I think it's in ABCs of Reading, probably in a number of works, Ezra Pound talks about 3 elements of poetry. The phanopoeic, which is what Ginsberg just referenced, is like the kind of the creation of the image in the imagination. The other one is kind of what we were just talking about, the melopoeic, the kind of the sound making, the melody making, the music making element of speech. I think the other one is something like the logopoeic, maybe, which is like the thought or something. I actually forget what the third one is, but I think that might be it. And Allen Ginsberg visited Ezra Pound in St. Elizabeth's while he was in an insane asylum and kind of potentially a war criminal for he was in a war camp in Italy and was doing radio broadcasts for the fascists in Italy. So it wasn't, many people went to visit Ezra Pound in St. Elizabeth's, but the fact that Ginsberg's kind of referencing him here, who was not only a conservative poet, but literally a fascist, I think he deeply admire Ezra Pound's poetry and went on record saying that on many occasions. But I think his reference to that here is a kind of way of establishing the kind of deep aesthetic values that he holds as a poet that in some sense is trying to kind of be a bulwark against the move that William F. Buckley is often trying to make to say, look, these kinds of bohemian leftist intellectuals, they only care about art in order to further their political interests. Or that kind of an argument is often made. And I think one way you can understand what Allen Ginsberg's trying to do here is to say, no, these interests are so deeply linked, and I don't have a kind of bias against the individual. I have it against the image, the imagination, and the value of the work itself. Something like that.
The language we speak in every day. Those are the building blocks of art. So television can't be arty until television comes around to the old human usages.
Well, I think television done all right. Certain plays seem to be pretty arty without using them. Shakespeare, for instance.
Well, I found, for instance, I can't read my poetry on television.
Well,
you're describing me as like a big popular poet. Well, no,
Yes.
I don't have the same problem as Henry Miller or D.H. Lawrence had, or Jean Genet, or every poet in
God, I guess D.H. Lawrence did live into the television era.
Almost every poet. All the avant-garde poets, and that's our subject.
Did he?
Here.
Anyway, I don't know.
The avant-garde, in a sense, has no medium to communicate with you all
No, but
directly.
surely the point with Ginsberg is that
We're shut out, kind of. I can get up here and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah about Filatio, but I can't talk, in a way that a truck driver will understand that I'm making sense.
Well, I'll interpret for you. How's that?
Oh, okay, you interpret.
No, but the
Okay.
point I'm trying to make is that this continuum that you just assaulted us with, it began with Henry James and ended with you.
No,
is something that I
Henry
think
Miller,
that
I'm
is-
sorry.
Oh, Henry Miller. Oh.
Wow, that really suggests something very, very interesting. That William F. Buckley heard Henry Miller and changed it to Henry James. A verhöhn. A little bit of a Freudian mishearing there, Billy. But also, it's just hilarious that he thought that made sense. That Henry James is being censored on television. He's like, no, it's more the guy who's talking about fucking a woman in the bathtub and ripping her clothes off. It's probably more Henry Miller than Henry James that's having a hard time on television. It is so good. Thank you again. I'm loving it.
I don't think I said James.
So
You did,
this is
yeah, that's
ugh.
You're hallucinating Henry James. No, I hallucinate Henry Miller. Have you
Well-
read Miller, by the way?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
How do you find
I've
it?
read everything.
How
I
do you
love
find
history.
it?
I've read everything. What a fucking dick.
How do you find Henry Miller?
Well, I think he's I think he's a very important writer. I think his philosophy is the greatest bore.
No,
ever
I mean as a
created.
prose writer.
Yeah.
Like a style.
Oh,
See, yeah, he's doing it again. So, okay, this is confirming my hypothesis. He's like, no. He's kind of performing the move back on William F. Buckley. Like, no, not the politics, the prose.
Tremendous.
Oh.
Tremendous, yeah. But I would like to.
What I'm curious about is what odd literature have you read that would be considered like quote subversive, like Henry Miller, that you like? In other words, what are your real literary tastes?
Because if you're really not concerned about the politics, surely you would just statistically find some interest in some work. You're not so boorish and so uncultured to say, of all things, that there's no good art that's subversive. Are you, Billy?
Well, they're eclectic,
Yeah.
but
You read Genet, for instance.
no.
Interesting.
No,
Good
I haven't
prose,
read
very
Genet.
delicate prose.
I haven't read Genet. I suppose I
Céline?
know that people. Who?
Louis Ferdinand Céline,
No,
French, right?
no,
Journey
I
to
know.
the
Yeah.
North.
I even know who introduced you to Celine Burroughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Old teacher.
The
Burroughs and Kerouac.
in Kerouac. Yeah.
Kerouac
yeah.
likes your style
Kerouac wants me to be president.
because he likes your style of speech.
It's
all aesthetics. Yeah, he wants you to be president because he likes your style. Aesthetics and politics are linked.
You believe, actually, you have, in a curious sort of way, a standard which says that there ought to be no standards.
No censorship. No, I'm not saying no standard. I'm saying no, that police can't come in with guns or arms and take me to jail for speaking free. I'm speaking of no constitutional free speech.
Yeah.
Or that the state should not be intruding on discourse in public discourse, and the state has a tendency to do that. I mean, I've experienced it in my own work. Say my first work, and I've experienced it occasionally. Well, I'm experiencing it now. Theories, FCC regulations. Okay, we're experiencing it now. The state, the octopus of the state, intruding on our language consciousness.
Well, no,
I'm experiencing.
Don't tread on me.
You are, because you're being denied my.
Gadsden Ginsberg.
There is the poet. There is the poet in you, because you really are exaggerating.
No, I couldn't. I can't read. Like you were speaking of Howell's poem, and I can't read that here. So that's my axe I can't bring forth. I have to hide my dear old light.
Well, but wait a minute, you weren't invited to read it here.
How?
I say you weren't invited to read it.
No, I wasn't invited.
Yeah.
I was
But
invited.
let's
to
simply talk
avant-garde
about whether or
instead.
not we have a police state which severely.
You weren't invited to read it here. It is amazing to me that people find that appealing. I'm so annoyed.
Really impinges on your freedom. It's true. I think we did have the successful prosecution of the comic tragedian, the fellow
Lenny
who died.
Bruce.
Yeah.
Which was later reversed.
They haven't been very. They have since been reversed.
Since after he was dead.
It has not been very. It has but not been numerous.
Oh, it's been in the avant-garde, which is our deal. It has decimated the avant-garde in New York. But this is information you probably don't know, but I would say over the last 5 years, since the 60s, probably more money has been put into fighting the state and the intrusions of the state than has been put in the Lower East Side into creation of movies and plays. In other words, for instance, with the great rise of the avant-garde group filmmakers Cinematheque, an enormous amount of money was put out defending Flaming Creatures, Genet's movie, and all sorts of
an
films.
enormous amount of money was spent in prosecuting them.
Even more. That's what's so horrible. Taxpayers' money is being used up to put down these artists.
No, but see, the
Who always
taxpayers-
win in the end, in the long run.
taxpayers take the position that they ought to be free to protect certain kinds of privacy.
That's
right?
the police take that position, not the taxpayers. The taxpayers really would.
The police
are now.
enforce the laws that the taxpayers pass.
No, they've enforced them arbitrarily, like they thought they were enforcing, quote, the laws about Lenny Bruce, but they weren't. They were interpreting it to put down Lenny Bruce, and the law and Constitution actually said they shouldn't have persecuted him.
Well, in the first place, it was
So
a
they were
split
wasting
decision. Now, wait a minute,
taxpayer money.
It was a split decision.
Well,
different
all the
judges
artists
came
in
to
New York,
different conclusions.
all the artists in New York got together and put out a big petition
To which they
saying,
yielded, yeah.
saying Lenny Bruce should be protected, to which the police did not yield, to which the district attorneys did not yield, to which the lower courts did not yield, to which nobody yielded for years and years until the poor man was dead.
But you're suggesting that there was a relationship. He died prematurely, you would agree.
He died prematurely, I think.
Excuse me, just 1 second. Another.
Excuse me just one second. I guess it's good to maybe talk about it at those ridiculous breaks. At least they have a better sound than in the last video where we watched this debate where it was like a college basketball buzzer at the end of every speech. Ding ding. So a little bit better. Sound matters. Yeah, obscenity laws are still around. I mean, I think obscenity laws don't have the same force that they did because of, in this medium itself, the ability to publish around those main things, those main forms makes it very accessible. And I think there's also been a social change in our attitudes towards curse words. But I wonder whether obscenity has been replaced by other forms of social censorship that people kind of come out for. And obviously censorship or ideas about censorship are a huge part of our public discourse. People are imagining themselves being censored all of the time. And we began this whole stream with somebody who was imagining themselves being kind of censored by fact checkers who were not qualified to fact check them. So I just think that maybe obscenity isn't it's not at the front anymore, but I'm sure there are cases I'm not aware of where it has been really detrimental to. I wonder if there is an avant-garde anymore, though. That might be an interesting question for this moment. Say, what would be the avant-garde of 2021? I have some ideas about what that might look like, but I think it's probably more likely to be on Twitch than it is to be at a small poetry press these days.
You say he died prematurely. I think it's much more likely that he died from excessive use of the kind of things that you're always urging on people than because the DA got after him at one point in his
I
career.
think like part of the shutdown on his general activity was the police activity, which prevented him from coming to New York even physically, lest he be arrested, much less working and leading a more or less healthy, active life. And he got all hung up on drugs, researching his, like a Kabbalic scholar, researching his legal case. It was really a Kafkian thing with like a state-organized conspiracy against him. It was very sad.
I don't really
It's also kind of interesting he says Kafkian instead of Kafkaesque. I kind of like Kafkian better. I'm going to try to bring it back.
think you're going to make a very plausible case, Mr. Ginsberg, suggesting that Lenny Bruce got hung up on account of being stopped in the moment halfway through a scatological tirade, which in itself suggested that he was slightly off.
So this is something that happens in almost all of these arguments about the censorship of dirty language, which is dirty language can be censored because any language that is dirty is also unimportant. That's kind of the implicit warrant, I think, to William F. Buckley Jr.'s argument, which is, it's some scatological tirade. I mean, is it going to have any effect? It's just a joke. It's just something. It doesn't have a lot of power and force. It's interesting to think about that argument being made by a major representative of American conservatism today, because the same argument, but with in a different context, is being used also by many conservatives today, which is, well, it's just a joke, which means that you shouldn't be concerned about what I'm saying. You shouldn't be concerned about the effect I'm saying, because even my own discourse doesn't have any import or effect. You're taking everything too seriously. And that way of evaluating discourse and its importance, not on the basis of how it affects people, but on the basis of some kind of properties within the words or the language or the kind of speech that's being used, suggests one of the things that's really, how to put this, something to pay attention to, a pattern to pay attention to in how language and politics come together. A lot of people want to say, language and politics, that's not serious enough to think about the relationship between language and politics. Politics is about real issues. It's about taxpayer money, things like that. But the very idea of what we think is important is often being coded by the kinds of arguments about language that are being made, like this one right here. That you can just tell by the way that certain people speak that what they're saying isn't important. Not a very healthy attitude to have in democracy, I would say.
A scatological tirade, it was not. It was political speech. You know, like what you call scatological tirade was the language he was using, paraphrasing redneck Southern sheriffs. You know, he was doing old Swiftian satire, making use of the actual language of what he felt was the psychic enemy.
Yeah.
He was presenting it in
He's saying it
public,
better
in
than I
front, and he was arrested for presenting that political evidence, so to speak.
No, I don't think he was arrested for
Yes,
it.
yes.
Because he was trying to make a political point.
His,
You really believe
no,
that?
well, no. The texts of his
Monologue.
Nightclub routines
Yeah.
were very similar to Burroughs's, actually, and were primarily social political criticism. Actually, yes.
Well, I know, and some people say that
In fact, that's why
Desaad
they were-
was engaged in political,
Well, he was,
primarily in political criticism.
Well, more-
And as a matter of fact, there's no question but that he was committed by people who had political motives in part in mind.
I
But
think
my point about Lenny Bruce is that he undertook to challenge publicly certain conventions which in my
Of language and thought.
judgment perfectly civilized people are entitled to maintain.
And which perfectly civilized people are entitled to challenge under
Question is
our
whether he's
democratic
civilized.
discourse.
Question is whether he's civilized.
Aesthetic
I think that'd be
discourse.
interesting.
Notice
to
that
talk
again.
about. But I don't.
How do you
I don't-
determine that somebody's uncivilized and say they shouldn't talk?
I think it's worthwhile. Now wait a minute. You can determine that somebody's uncivilized without necessarily determining that you shouldn't talk, can't you?
Well, the problem with
Can you do that though? I mean, if you have available to you a judgment with the predicate of uncivilized in it, is it possible to genuinely think about a discourse as uncivilized and think that it belongs in public? I think maybe it is, but the only way I can imagine that is exactly what William F. Buckley Jr. imagines he's doing on Firing Line, which is to bring what he thinks is uncivilized discourse into the public to show why it shouldn't be there, to show why it should be ignored and laughed at and forgotten. But in doing that, he nevertheless did us a great public service to have this document right now of the strange carnivalesque mixture of discourses that contrasted with his own. It's actually really important to have William F. Buckley Jr.'s voice in these, I think, to be able to hear what these other ways of speaking and thinking and feeling are responding to. I really value the Firing Line archive for that.
Him was that I think the district attorneys in the state felt that he was so barbaric he should not be allowed to present his evidence in public. Or so barbaric I can't read how in public, or God knows what would happen if we tuned into your secret consciousness, or anybody's here. Why don't I read a poem? I mean,
Sure, go ahead.
a legal poem.
Go ahead, sure. Yeah, do you have one?
A legal poem. Yes, I have one. An interesting project.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a poem which I wrote on LSD.
Under the influence?
Under the influence of LSD.
This is a beautiful moment. I remember this from before, because here it's again a kind of argument about discourse that if William F. Buckley's imagining, we have these arguments about LSD that are happening at this time in the public sphere, where was it Cary Grant whose son died tragically, and he was like, okay, was caused by LSD, and all of these, especially people like William F. Buckley, saying this is degenerating the youth, these are dangerous drugs. And again, before Ginsberg was saying you don't have the data to understand police violence and to understand something like the Watts riots or Watts rebellion if you don't know what language the police are using when they're policing black communities. And here he's going to make the same kind of move, I think, in a different direction, saying you really can't understand the LSD experience unless you can hear the kind of discourse or language that can come from it. So he's showing us all these different ways that you can use language as evidence for public meaning. Beautiful.
It's longish.
How long?
Well, long enough to be entertaining.
I mean, just roughly speaking, just so I can gauge it.
1, 2, 3 pages.
I also love how he's kind of showing the actual boorishness and this William F. Buckley Jr. and many conservatives who strike this particular posture. It not as common today as it was back then, of being like, I'm really interested in culture and stuff, where he's like, do we really have time for a long poem? Yeah, maybe if it was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow or something, because he's that long in his name. We know he's a Longfellow, but Ginsberg?
Long text, but it's a good text. And it's a piece of interesting
Gotta
evidence.
cut it down to
Can I-
305.
You can interrupt it.
Yeah, fine.
We can all interrupt it and discuss text.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Wales Visitation.
W.H.
W-A-L-E-S. Written in Wales, high on LSD.
Wales Visitation. I like William F. Buckley Jr. looks like such, even more than I realized before, like how ridiculous he looks in this interview. That he thinks that, he's like, no, Ginsberg's like, no, I actually just went to Wales, the country.
Fifth hour of LSD for those who are specific.
I know he's on LSD, but I didn't visit a whale.
White fog lifting and falling on the mountain brow. Trees moving in rivers of wind. The clouds arise as on a wave. Gigantic eddy lifting mist above teeming ferns. Exquisitely swayed along a green crag glimpsed through mullioned glass in valley rain.
Nice.
Opening. Bardic of self. Visitation. Tell naught but what's seen by one man in a vale in Albion, of the folk whose physical sciences end in ecology, the wisdom of earthly relations, of mouths and eyes, internet 10 centuries, visible orchards of mind language, manifest human, of the satanic thistle that raises its horned symmetry, flowering above sister grass daisies, small pink, bloomlets angelic as light bulbs. Remember, 160 miles from London's symmetrical thorn tower, a network of TV pictures flashing bearded yourself, the lambs on the tree-nooked hillsides, this day bleating heard in Blake's old ear, and the silent thought of Wordsworth in eld stillness, clouds passing through skeleton arches of Tintern Abbey, barred nameless as the vast babble to vastness. All the valley quivered, one extended motion, wind undulating on mossy hills, a giant wash that sank white fog delicately down red runnels on the mountainside whose leaf branch tendrils moved a sway in granitic undertow down, and lifted the floating nebulous upward, and lifted the arms of the trees, and lifted the grasses an instant in balance, and lifted the lambs to hold still, and lifted the green of the hill in one solemn wave. A solid mass of heaven, mist-infused, ebbs through the veil, a wavelet of immensity, lapping, gigantic, through Lanthony Valley, the length of all England, valley upon valley under heaven's ocean tongued with cloud hang, roar of the mountain wind, slow, sigh of the body, one being on the mountainside stirring gently, exquisite scales trembling everywhere in balance, one motion on the sky's cloudy floor shifting through a million-footed daisies, one majesty, the motion that stirred wet grass quivering to the farthest tendril of white fog poured down through shivering flowers on the mountain's head. No imperfection in the budded mountain. Valleys breathe, heaven and earth moving together. Daisies push inches of yellow air. Vegetables tremble. Green atoms shiver in grassy mandalas. Sheep speckle the mountainside, revolving their jaws with empty eyes. Tree-lined canals networked with live farmland. Horses dance in the warm rain. Out on the hillside, into the ocean sound, into delicate gusts of wet air, fall on the ground, oh great wetness, oh mother, no harm on thy body. Stare close, no imperfection in the grass, each flower Buddha eye, repeating the story, the myriad-formed soul. Kneel before the foxglove, raising green buds, mauve bells droop doubled down the stem, trembling antennae. Look in the eye of the branded lambs that stare breathing stock still under dripping hawthorn. I lay down, mixing my beard with the wet hair of the mountainside, smelling the brown vagina moist ground, harmless, tasting the violet thistle hair, sweetness. One being so balanced, so vast, that its softest breath moves every floweret in the stillness on the valley floor, lifts trees on their roots, grown through breast and neck, a great O to earth heart, calling our presence together. The great secret is no secret, senses fit the winds, visible is visible, rain mist curtains wave through the bearded veil. Cross-legged on a rock, in dusk rain, mind moveless, breath trembles in white daisies by the roadside, heaven breath and my own symmetric, airs wavering through antlered green fern drawn in my navel, same breath as breathes through Capelifan. Sounds of Aleph and Aum through forests of gristle, my skull and Lord Hereford's knob equal, all Albion one.
So thanks, Porter Muffins, for your link. I might not get to it tonight because we're gonna keep watching this one, but I'll check it out. If we get to the end of this video, I'll check that out and we'll take a look. But thanks for coming back to the stream. There's a lot going on here, but one thing that strikes me first is the brilliance of choosing this poem for this purpose. There's so much that's traditional. It might not seem that way, but there's much that's traditional in the poem that he just read, which is called A Visitation to Wales. even in its allusions to Albion, which is this kind of Spencerian Edmund Spenser, the great Renaissance English poet. Great, not my favorite, but Albion, this kind of archaic name for England. And he talks about Tintern Abbey, which is, there's a very famous poem by William Wordsworth, the Romantic English poet, lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey, where he talks about the still sad music of humanity. Almost a kind of manifesto of the Romantic poetic movement in English poetry, and he talks about, there's a Wordsworthian moment, there's the his Whitman-esque moment, which is often in Ginsberg. So the fact that he could have that ability to be so connected to a tradition while under the influence of LSD is itself an argument against many of the ways that LSD was being described, and even many of the ways that LSD was being promoted as a break, as a moment of discontinuity with not only traditional mores and values, but with reality itself. It was so dangerous, you weren't in there. And so to show that one, under the influence of this powerful drug, could nevertheless share the values, the aesthetic values, that Buckley and his conservative, his Yale-y educated audience would also at least profess to hold, certainly should register something, unless they miss the references too, because they don't really believe.
I kind of like that. Amazing. Yeah. I was amazed to be able to get through a poem of such length.
Yeah, exactly. The material conjuring of the roots of their values. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, Steve.
Well, a lot of modern poetry one doesn't really follow in any narrative sense, does one?
One doesn't follow in any narrative sense. I'm sorry. An absolute bore. Spell it either way.
Well, they probably could follow my hand gestures and my eye face gestures. You were very responsive. That was nice. That was good.
No, I enjoyed it. I think it's very beautiful. Now, are you suggesting that because you took that while under LSD, you were able to do it?
Well,
I
think it could be. It's a natural thing. I cited Blake and Wordsworth as having that natural vision.
Yeah.
I think the LSD thing is not an unnatural vision, as evidenced by the particular details, like sheep speckle the mountainside, revolving their jaws with empty eyes, that you recognize, that are human things that like everybody has seen in nature.
Yeah.
I think the LSD clarified my mind and left it open to get that sense of giant, vast consciousness. Yeah. Specifically, the one thing I noticed, which I was trying to describe, was that the ocean of heaven, the atmosphere, is like an ocean, and at the bottom of that ocean of air, there are all sorts of rivulets, of winds, breezes, and that those rivulets, like at the bottom of a fish tank, move all the trees, move the people around, the hair, the beards, the grass, the lamb's wool, hung rain-beaded in the grass, so that it's like one system, like one giant being breathing, one giant being that we all are part of, and which we always forget that we are together the God of the universe.
So Ginsberg, part of his testimony in the Chicago 7 trial, I don't think that he's in the movie that was made about it. I didn't see the movie. I already know how I feel about it. But maybe I will watch. I don't like Aaron Sorkin very much, but in the actual testimony, that why would you leave Allen Ginsberg out of your, I mean, just like, it's like free color. It's like free interest on your movie, but whatever. Or if he is in the movie, I'm sorry. I apologize to you, Aaron Sorkin, because I did not see the movie. But I heard that he was not in it. So his action that he took that got him involved in the trial was he was there at the protests, and he threw a bullhorn, megaphone, led people in some kind of chant and breathing exercises, Om Shanti Deva, something like that, and like having people breathe together. It's in an American, in other countries, I think it's maybe more common, but the idea of breathing as a political act, it has become one now for a number of reasons, but not in the way that, again, Allen Ginsberg was imagining it. That breath and the kind of unity of breath is an image of a kind of democratic vista, to use that Whitman-esque language again, of what it would mean like to have democratic unity, which wouldn't necessarily be the unity of belief, but the unity of breath. And that relationship between the political and the aesthetic, that's my hypothesis for what Ginsberg's rhetorical move is for this whole interview. It's not even really an interview, is it? That he's trying to kind of not undermine, but kind of actually establish connection with William F. Buckley's public persona, but in establishing that connection so authentically to show the inauthenticity of the very values that William F. Buckley suggests that he holds.
You say together. But
it's given me even more respect for Allen Ginsberg as a great public orator. Orator is such a kind of, it's a word that's always inappropriate. No one can be described as an orator, which is kind of why I like using it. Because it always has that moment of kind of making things strange. There aren't really any good orators. People who get up at a pulpit and orate, people like to say Obama was a good speaker. That wasn't I didn't get that. I didn't feel, I think I understand why people are saying that. To me, he seemed kind of too smooth. I didn't feel much about it, about what he was saying. It didn't feel real. Whereas the people who are the good orators often are not having that modality of address as at least their main modality. They're always kind of at some distance from it. But even if you were to go back to whatever ancient republic you're imagining, that's exactly how it was always being performed. There always has to be some distance between the public imagination of the speaker and the powerful moment of speaking performance. To inhabit it too closely is to confuse ethos with office. No one will recognize the power of your speech if it's too close to what is imagined as what is appropriate. It has to have some distance. Decorum isn't just about fitting, it's about the ability to recognize ethos. Definitely not an orator, but someone who's engaging in public and saying, this is for you. Yeah. I like that. I'm using orator as a kind of a way of establishing the distance that everyone has from the position of the orator. There is no orator, which is why it's like a helpful position to keep around, I think. But no, I might be totally crazy with that opinion. Burke talks about Whitman as being able to see around the corner. It's a good word for Ginsberg, too. Yeah, I like that, seeing around the corner.
You found sometimes a saying that it's not really together. It's you as an individual who's God, or anyone who discovers his consciousness.
Going back to that first question you asked, like, are the hippies the quote in order? I think the primary hippie and beatnik originally, back 56, Kerouac, Burroughs, perception was a recognition of that unity of being and a recognition of that great consciousness which we all were identical with, see? And that's what I think is the meaning of that flower power and, like, make love, not war. Ultimately, it's like it's grounded in an understanding of the nature of the universe and that you can't fight us. We can't fight us. That force, finally, is, at least at this level of civilization, is just like a mess and is not going to resolve the problem. And the problem is seeing our unity, particularly black and white, particularly square and hippie, particularly police and student, particularly Birchite and faggot individualist.
Well, you know what in my judgment is unsatisfactory about this analysis. I really don't think, incidentally, that it's so much analytical.
I like how he's using all of these words that kind of go underneath the censor. So in his poem, A Visitation to Wales, he says vagina. And here he's like, faggot. He's like, you can't censor me for saying faggot. The force of that is even more charged because William F. Buckley makes a point to introduce him as a homosexual before he has a chance to say anything. Very clever guy.
As it is poetical.
But poesy. Poesy was the oldest form.
Yeah.
Analysis.
He's using all these Renaissance poesy.
Pretensions.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes
it's like I know the tradition.
My own notion, reading most hippie literature, is that it succeeds in making love utterly rancid. because
No more
I
rancid than
understand
the advertisements on television, which are
No,
about
we're not talking
rancidness
about
and
that. Now, look,
deodorants.
I find some butter rancid too, but come on. As Norman Mailer says, allow people their metaphors.
Well, Mailer's version of love.
No,
is
now
a
we're
little
talking about
difficult
Mailer.
and tough.
We're not talking about Mailer. We're talking, at this moment, we're talking about what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Just
and
I've talked long enough.
the point is that the hippies, who have, as you know, been compared to the Adamites of the 2nd century,
Oh, the Diggers,
precisely-
the English Digger group.
Yeah.
The Diggers, the English Civil War group, like the Levelers, the Diggers, many associated groups. Again, showing that he knows the political history at least as well as William F. Buckley Jr., probably a little bit better. That these kinds of claims to freedom and individual rights, often values that the American conservatives will put forward, or were being articulated in a context in which they would be. There wasn't even such a thing as the left and right distinction, because that comes in the French Revolution, right? This is before the French Revolution by almost a century, in the English Civil War. But those values are being articulated by a kind of religious, and Ginsberg, I think, would think about himself as like a religious movement for liberation. But it might seem kind of like radically leftist today if you were to kind of see it only within the limited terms of your present moment.
And the paradiddles that, precisely by their failure to understand the limitations of love, really don't give you any idea of the potential of love, or even of the efficacy of love. If love is just something, a mood that you crank on, preferably under some narcotic impulse, then as I understand,
I love
it,
the
you
look down,
lose
just like there's not much traction, not much tread on this tire.
any true understanding of human beings, of the ambiguity of the human temperament.
Were it that, it would certainly be a loss of understanding, if
Yeah.
it were that. But I don't think that, at best, what was intended, or what comes through, actually, at best in Haight-Ashbury is that at all. I think, first of all, love is not...
So Haight-Ashbury is the famous street in San Francisco where, I don't know, we could say it was a congress of the non-squares.
was ultimately proposed. It was a widening of awareness.
Yeah.
From the feeling that we were separate, alienated, isolated individuals to be regimented and made into advertising workers or soldiers going off with short Prussian haircuts to napalm in Vietnam.
If that's all that it was, after all, the fraternity of Christianity is exactly about that. To
So-
show that we are a community, and that we're... Excuse me.
I like how the commercial like rings the doorbell, like I'm here, and just interrupts. I actually really prefer the commercial announcing itself as interruption within the program. And you have in these older television shows, in very early television, the ads are just part of the, like they don't cut away to anything. It's just some guy's like, oh, okay, well, I'll return to your question in one moment. In the meantime, Lucky Strike, and the guy just does the ad for you, which we're kind of getting back to with YouTube, where someone's like, this video is sponsored by Squarespace. So weirdly, we've come around in under a century to that model. But I like the just being like, no, this is an interruption. Sorry, yeah, we have to do this shit. Yeah, it's like, it's podcast live reads is exactly what it is. Yeah. It used to be all that, and then it went to, they got more sophisticated. But this is kind of one of these middle moments where they're actually getting interrupted by the studio producer who's like, actually got to go to an ad right now, guys. But it's like so much more humane, isn't it? Just to be like, this isn't interruption. Let's not like massage it perfectly into the content of the thing that you're watching. That feels more offensive to me. But
In what sense have the hippies or the Beats said something that isn't, after all, at the essence of the whole Christian idea, that we are all related to each other?
In no sense have they said anything new, nothing new under the sun, except that they've brought forward and out front, both like politically and sociologically and consciousness and avant-garde art-wise, the old Gnostic tradition, which had been somewhat suppressed by the horror of Babylon, that is to say, the organized, rigidified, militarily crusading church.
It should have been, too.
I mean, after all, it was Cardinal Spellman here who was one of the key figures in starting the Vietnam War, with his backing of Jim, and he was one of the people that got together, I believe it was with Nixon.
Do you really believe that myth?
Oh, well, I think the Pope had to rebuke him for being so bloodthirsty toward the end of his life.
I like this kind of like this performance of kind of embarrassed politeness, like, oh, I think it was this, like a thing that he definitely knows. How different from the model of discourse that's just like, this is a fact and it's proven, where it's kind of like at the moment at which something is genuinely undeniable or kind of factual, and you present it that way, you present it almost ironically as being like, oh, I guess I suppose that it is this case, and you just present it with a level of detail that would be impossible for you to have unless it was something that you knew. So that facticity shows itself in style, again, aesthetics, shows itself in the style rather than in some kind of a moment of authority, which pulls away from the discourse that you're having to somebody outside of it who's going to kind of back you up. The appeal to authority is like, oh, if my cousins weren't here, you would be in so much trouble. And that's like all of our public discourse. But Chad Ginsberg is here to show you another way.
Christmas, didn't he?
Oh, no. No, he
Yeah, I
didn't.
think the Pope
No, he
did say
didn't.
that. Please, Copeland, don't scream for victory. There is no victory in the Sacred Heart.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
don't tell us that you
The
got
Sacred
some-
Heart. A little Catholic nod there when he's talking about Cardinal Spellman and the Pope. It's like the Sacred Heart. There's this devotion in Catholicism to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Ginza Chad, yeah.
taken under drugs and suggest that it's true.
I mean, that
He was
Spellman,
not- No.
President Jim was our
Spellman,
CIA
Spellman said that
man.
he was praying for the victory of
Yes,
our forces
of our
in
forces.
Vietnam.
And also saying that we had to have victory too, rather than.
Oh, by the way, Buckley is Catholic. So this is it's getting a little bit. It's a little bit personal in that respect, but how granted it is to Ginsberg, who was introduced once again, I can't help but say it, as being a homosexual and a hippie of all hippies. So he's not calling him out, but he is.
Like
No,
reconciliation with the Viet Cong.
No, he was always in favor.
But also,
of
like, he was one of the
reconciliation.
people that was involved originally with Nixon and Dulles and probably Leo Cherney in proposing Diem as our man in Vietnam to substitute for the
Well,
election, and
yeah.
propose, and you know, like
The
proposing
CIA,
like-
the
I
Catholic
don't know where you
intelligence
get the
agency.
police.
I don't know where you got your demonology.
As
The
sometimes
last
been
person I
jokingly
got from that
called.
was from Man from
I got it
Uncle,
from the New York
whatever
Times.
his name.
I got my demonology from the New York Times.
Well, maybe you should.
Also from his speeches. Spellman was one of the people who was calling
No,
for the
Spellman was an
calling for a
intellectual.
rollback also on censorship too. Like he didn't like Tropic of Cancer. He made a big speech in
That-
Denver
That's the Henry
denouncing
Miller
it.
book you're
What
talking
do you
about
want to do?
before.
Talk about Spellman?
We're talking about the Whore of Babylon, the Christian tradition, and I was saying,
So the Whore of Babylon. that's a pretty good one. That's he is a poet, You do need to be a poet to be really good at argument, maybe. Because the Whore of Babylon, it's this moment in the book of the Apocalypse or Revelation, the last book of the Bible, that is part of this vision of the end times. But it's often also described a way of describing the Catholic Church from enemies of the Catholic Church, Christian enemies of the Catholic Church. So it's a kind of subtle moment of equivocation that is certainly understood by both parties here, I
the
think.
Gnostic open tradition instead of
Do
the
you
old
want to say
bring
that
down.
Spellman was short and ugly while you're at it? And get
No,
that
no,
in?
no, that his ideas
I know,
were
I'm-
generally negative and unsympathetic
Ad
in
hominem.
terms of the growth of spirit when he was
Is it
supposed to be
though?
representing the
Well,
Sacred Heart.
I disagree with you very strongly, as witness the fact that when Cardinal Spellman died,
Yes.
hundreds of thousands of people who knew him best mourned the passing of a great benevolence. Now,
Om Raksha Raksha Hum Hum Hum
no,
Pet
I
Svaha.
don't know that language.
Well, that's Tibetan. It's like an exorcism.
Yeah. All right. Now, one of the reasons why I'm rather glad that you made this salient is because it precisely dramatizes my point.
Yeah.
That your
Buckley's tradition is the voice. This is like another way that sound is important. It's like it's the voice, it's the look, it's the tone. But I think that Buckley does have a tradition. He comes from like a Jesuit Catholic oil family in Texas, which is a kind of tradition. Hundreds of thousands of people who knew him best. Yeah. Ginsberg is an artisan, so he needs to know the ins and outs. Yeah. I mean, he also he's like a world-class individual, and I don't know so much about Ginsberg, so you kind of got to know like what your weight class is when you invite someone on. You try to embarrass them, So like I think the people that do this kind of work today on someone like Steven Crowder, Steven Crowder's not in the weight class of William F. Buckley, but he knows that if you're trying to embarrass someone, you need to find someone who like won't be able to do this to you, who won't know that you're the tradition that you rely upon better than yourself. That's why you're going to go to talk to college freshmen or something like that.
Your kind of love, for instance, is no use.
But again, I still am very, very grateful to William F. Buckley Jr. for creating the thing that he did, even if his reasons for doing it were not the reasons that I like it.
It's the Viet Cong, what my kind of love is.
I mean, napalm love?
That's right, that's right.
Napalm love.
Yeah,
Holy
in
shit.
other words,
Actually,
the-
why don't you
the-
try
the
some
use-
LSD
the
love
use of
on them?
force.
Why don't you try some LSD love on them? It'll be less
I know, me too.
chromosome damage than napalm.
That's why I'm watching Thomas
this
Sowell
is what
videos
our-
embarrassingly being
yes,
shown
yes.
on this stream.
I mean, if
It's
you have any
I'm on my
I'm
actual
all in
YouTube
favor of
history.
chemical warfare. I guess.
With LSD, you know what I'm saying?
The,
That would be the only
no,
kind of chemical warfare.
the point is,
well, you
of
have to drop
course,
it on our side, too.
the point is that you can't effectively
Have you tried
love
acid?
anybody unless you recognize.
Have you turned on to anything?
No.
He's like, no, I am the square. That's like when William F. Buckley he understands the assignment, as the kids say today. He understands the assignment here. He's like, no, I'm not turned on to anything. I'm a fucking square dude. I'm William F. Buckley Jr.
The point is that you can't effectively love anybody unless you are prepared to recognize the fact of sinfulness.
Oh, that's a
Any
original
attempt to
sin.
immanentize flower power is just going to lead you right to Buchenwald.
Well,
Oh,
no, I think it was
God.
the original sin shot that led to Buchenwald.
So gross.
I agree. I grant. But
you Catholic?
are
Are
you
you Catholic?
Yes, I am. Are you saying
I
that?
believe in the Sacred Heart.
Like
but
you
I'm not
didn't
so
know.
sure about the original sin thing you want to push on everybody. It's too much of a guilt producer, or as it's been used. You know, there's original sin, therefore we got to use napalm. Come on.
So there's this thing that William F. Buckley does with his eyes.
As it's been used, you know, we got to.
That thing. See that? Let's watch it again.
Thing you want to push on everybody.
That, I mean, almost like almost more than like the Johnny Carson kind of like side eye look. That's the equivalent of the William F. Buckley lifting the eyes, which is, it kind of speaks to the other audience that he's really speaking. He's like, yes, wow, how ridiculous. It's like a moment of always gesturing to that, to the other meaning of what someone is saying, where he's like, yes, I'm listening, but I'm not listening. I'm totally owning this guy. I mean, it's not even owning, it's just like this guy's owning himself. Like, this person is so ridiculous they don't need to be listened to. It's like the perfect kind of anti-democratic face.
Are you saying
I
that?
believe in the Sacred Heart, but I'm not so sure about the original sin thing you want to push on everybody. It's too much of a guilt producer, or as it's been used. You know, there's original sin, therefore we got to use napalm. Come on. I mean, it's a large jump you're making.
Would you, for instance, let me ask you this: suppose you had the following two exclusive alternatives. Let's say, having run temporarily out of LSD, to drop napalm on a Gestapo unit that was on its way to Buchenwald to, let's say, kill 100,000 Jews.
One thing that will never get old is the fucking Gedanken experiments that you get from these, like, well, what if it was the Nazis? Would you do it to them? This argument will always forever be with us. It will never die. It will never die. Welcome to American politics. Let's see what he says.
I would say
And
bring it
throw
right up
flowers
to
at
present. Buy off Ho Chi Minh. We got lots of money. Buy off Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong.
I said, if you
With money.
had those exclusive alternatives.
The goose is out of the bottle. You're putting a goose in a bottle with a narrow neck and saying, how do you get the goose in the bottle? The goose is out of the bottle, sir.
I know.
To get the goose out of the bottle in Vietnam, buy off Ho Chi Minh, buy off Mao Zedong. We got lots of money. Spend it. Use
Yeah.
it for something sensible instead of like trying to
That's it.
escalate the fighting and conflict.
So I'm sure, like, at the time when people were watching this, they were like, that is so insane. You would give money to our enemies? Well, welcome to the Afghanistan War, much later with a much more sophisticated army, where both Republican and Democratic presidents, commanders-in-chief, did exactly that. And in fact, that's always what we've done. It's just a question of who we were paying.
It's interesting that
By
we do
using
that.
conflict, you only escalate conflict.
Now, would that be a good thing if we bought them?
It would be better than what we're doing.
Okay, it would be a good thing. Therefore, somebody has to produce money, right?
We got $70 billion a year that's floating around.
Someone has to
You're
produce
against,
money.
but you're against a system that made that surplus available. You
No,
counseled,
no,
counseled
no.
your disciples, don't work for dollars, don't work for money, quote unquote.
Don't work for money.
Yeah.
If the
how
money,
are we going to have money with which to buy off people that you want to buy off unless somebody makes the money?
The same way we get the money to buy napalm, man. We've got that money there. Actually,
Yes.
buy them off with production.
Well, but you're
give
against
them
production,
things.
aren't you?
Pardon me?
You're against
No,
production.
no, I'm
How you
in
gonna have
favor of production as long as the production is dedicated to something constructive instead of just destructive, more bombs, more atom bombs, more chemical warfare, more negative. Now, the old obvious thing that a negative, we've got 800 million people to face. We do have a race war, despite what Professor Kahn thinks. In the sense of our motivation, it seems to me, our motivation is fear of the yellow life form virus taking over the planet.
Well, I'm sure we got over that.
I don't think we're going to make it with the Chinese unless we display a certain amount of acceptance of their existence on the planet and helpfulness and cooperation. And I think the cause of their paranoia, because their paranoia is our paranoia, it's a mirror reflecting system. The two images are just reflecting each other, paranoia building up, like in a barroom brawl. The more we think in terms...
If you keep this up, I'm going to ask you to read more poetry.
Oh. Why don't I sing instead? Why don't I sing?
No, it's just that in politics you are a little bit naive, right?
Well, that's a language naive.
Yeah.
I come from an old
think
tradition.
So there's a lot that just happened there. One is that William F. Buckley, he does all his guests. So if this is the first time watching Firing Line, all of his guests from the left, he has other guests, but you might be shocked. I mean, he's being quite rude in a way, to being like Allen Ginsberg, who's a poet who he invited onto his show. He's like basically making a joke at the expense even of his poetry. Be like, wow, your politics is so shit, I'd rather listen to your terrible poetry. It's like, why did you invite him on? Well, you get it. I mean, this is the formula of the show, to like embarrass people. But then what Allen Ginsberg does is like, oh, okay, and he pulls out a glass harmonica. Which I don't know, like, how these shows were produced. Like, I don't think William F. Buckley had an earpiece in. So it's possible that, like, he didn't know. Like, the producer can't talk into his ear in the way that they do now. So, like, there might look at his face. Like, just the amazing, like, things are a little looser back then, you know? You just, like, you could get anything in there. People are going to ask you a bunch of questions coming in the studio. They're just like, whatever, a bunch of fucking hippies are going to be on TV. So, of course, they got weird shit. But he's just going to start playing his glass.
You know, the Hare Krishna
So good.
No, go ahead.
to the preservation of the universe instead of its destruction. Krishna returns in the Bhagavad Gita every time there's a flood, fire, original sin leading to atom bombs.
This shot is so good. This is the fucking money shot, man. This is the best troll of all time. I love him. I love him so much. I think he's absolutely sincere, which is why he's the best troll of all time. But I think he also understands what he's doing. Like, he believes that this message could reach someone who doesn't already hear it. Could be anybody. He really believes in the unity of the breath and the unity of the wind. He's respects his own art. He's not doing it as a joke, but I think he is kind of like a troll in the sense that if a troll, like, what does trolling do? Yeah. What does trolling do? Well, it tries to kind of change power relations by provoking emotions that people don't want to have. And William F. Buckley Jr.'s whole thing is that his ability to wear a shit-eating grin. But, like, just the awkwardness and the discomfort he'll have in front of, like, the alien experience that he's being subjected to, that he doesn't have the ability to kind of just, like, make it mean something else very quickly. I think that's what trolling does. When it's done well, it's usually done poorly, like most poetry. But good poets, maybe they make good trolls.
Well, now, if you armed 700 or 500,000 Americans with little tiny $15 harmoniums and sent them in against the Viet Cong, you'd probably get better results.
Well,
as a matter of practical, unnaive politics.
you mean by contrast with the present results?
Well, by contrast with the present, bring down fear, bad feeling, negative approach.
Now, tell me,
Paranoia.
who's paranoia?
It's also interesting to note that this idea that, like, okay, these hippies thought that aesthetics would be part of politics in the Cold War. Okay, the CIA also thought that, and they take Jackson Pollock's works on a global tour. So I'm sure that there are people within William F. Buckley Jr.'s circle, some friends of his, who shared his politics, who believe the same thing that Allen Ginsberg did, that this would have a greater effect than the bombs. They're like, those brass over there at the Pentagon, they don't know what's the real thing. What's the real thing that's really going to get people is this stuff, but it's just a question of what they were trying to do with it.
World's paranoia, yours, mine, I guess.
The Iowa Writers Workshop is that's like, I had like some friends over for a little soiree the other night, and this came up, this thing, and anytime someone hears about it for the first time, it's always kind of like a wild moment to be like, the CIA infiltrates the Iowa Writers Workshop, which produced most of the kind of major contemporary, not most, that's a overstating the claim a little bit, but many of the major American prose fiction writers of the second half of the 20th century, and that this was a CIA operation, at least in part, might kind of like fuck you up a little bit. Be like, oh, I didn't think I was being propagandized when I was reading those short stories.
Johnson and Rusk's. Certainly Dulles is paranoid.
You said recently that we are becoming a police state, no different from East Europe.
Yeah, I found
East Europe has kicked you out. We never kicked you out.
Yeah, well, I've had a taste of both, you know. I've been kicked out of, say, Cuba and Prague.
He was also named like King of May in Prague before he got kicked out. Well, what a day that must have been, where he's like wearing a crown of flowers, and then he's like at customs being deported in Prague.
And I'd been there've been attempts to set me up for
I think that's
arrest
right.
by the New York Narcotics Bureau for my political speech against the marijuana legalization.
Right.
How do you know?
Well, a friend of mine, Hunky, who's an old-time junkie from way back.
Yeah.
Hunky the Junkie.
And a very interesting literary figure. He appears in Kerouac's books.
Okay, sorry.
Was
That
busted in New York a couple years ago, and the police threatened to throw the book at him unless he brought some pot to my apartment, so that they could, under the Rockefeller no-knock law, bust into my apartment and bust me. Well, Hunky called my brother, who's a lawyer, and I went and complained to my representative, Congressman Farbstein in Washington, Congressman Jolson from Patterson, and went to Senator Kennedy's office and got a story in the Times about it, and got a story in the Washington Post, so that finally I had enough, energy to run around to protect myself by making enough stink about it. The same, the people, the detectives involved with that was a detective imp in New York. It was later busted.
These are like Pinchon level names. This is so good.
Pushing junk.
Detective Imp.
That.
So there's hope for everybody.
Well, no, it's hopeless unless the public realizes that, for instance, in this area of narcotics, drugs, marijuana, the police have been acting illegally all along, and the police have been running a police state in that area, which is causing immense social damage.
You mean acting illegally by what? By not running people in who, in fact, are violating the law?
Well, the police themselves have been peddling a lot of dope in New York, particularly.
No.
There was a whole series in the New York Times dealing with that.
At the instructions of Cardinal Spellman?
Well,
How ridiculous. I mean, this is the move, right? To be like, that's all just kind of paranoid conspiratorial thinking. So how can the New York Times be dismissed? Well, I think even at this time, the New York Times had the reputation of being left of center. So Buckley doesn't have much difficulty dismissing it.
I don't know what Cardinal Spellman was on.
He's got to get there quick.
I presume Spellman was not.
Before we get to it.
I think probably Spellman was very much morally against people smoking pot unless they do damage to themselves socially, and so he would prefer that they go to jail.
No, I do think that
You know how many people are in jail for
of
pot
loving
now?
people, you ought to pay a little attention to what it is that you say. It's rather reckless, rather wanton.
No. Oh, well, I have
These sort of categorical defamations.
You mean about the police? About the Narcotics Bureau in New York?
You can find police who are crooks. You can find popes who are crooks.
My dear.
But it is,
You can find police who are crooks. You can find popes who are crooks. Yep. Not sure what that argument goes towards to prove.
Full Narcotics Bureau. Shake up in police shift 3 top aides in Narcotics Union, February 17th, 1968.
It's like, Bucky, you do realize not everybody's Catholic, right?
Removal of Chief,
including not
Inspector
Allen
Blue
Ginsberg.
and his 2 top assistants stunned many police officials. Officers at the headquarters said it was the most dramatic shakeup they could remember in the Bureau.
so what?
Last December 13th, 3 detectives of the Bureau's Special Investigating Unit were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of selling narcotics to peddlers. The trial date has not been set.
Now wait a minute.
2
He fucking brought the receipts!
No, I
detectives,
said, wait a
one
minute,
of whom
wait a
was
minute.
indicted this week by federal grand jury on charges of selling drugs, were charged in a civil lawsuit yesterday with stealing $2,783 from a suspect during a heroin raid. March
wait a
7th,
minute.
1996. 2
Mr.
captains, a
Ginsberg?
lieutenant, and a sergeant have been transferred out of the police
hey,
department's
wait a minute,
Narcotics
wait a minute.
Bureau for pushing. It's all New York Times the last 3 months.
Yes, well,
So anyway, they try to set me up. That's why I'm trying to get it out there before I get busted.
I hope everybody recognizes what has just happened, you see. We started off by reading a gaudy headline about somebody very
I
high
read
up.
the
You know, he
brief
said it twice.
paragraph.
Chief Inspector, get that, Chief Inspector, you see. He gets fired, and he gets fired, and then you get down to the end of the story, and you find that 3 detectives have been caught selling junk. So he invites you to assume that the Chief Inspector was very likely implicated in the selling of this junk, whereas a much more reasonable implication is that he was
he's
precisely fired because he didn't catch these people sooner. So therefore, your attempt simply to reason that the whole fraternity is involved in this
As
is
the
just unreasonable.
department continues to investigate charges that the Bureau is riddled with corruption.
Oh, saved by the bell there, weren't we?
Mr. Ginsberg, I have a couple of questions I want to discuss with you, but it's getting late, so let's take a couple of questions first.
Mr. Ginsberg, you suggested.
Also, it's amazing. This is like a moment where, so in a communication studies department, which as I forget the name of the guy I started the video, this whole stream with, but he mentions it's pretty weird to be a professor in communication. Dude, never have truer words spoken. But it's weird also because nobody studies the same shit. Everyone studies just like whatever their own thing is. So it's not like an academic field in the way that most people think about it. And most people don't think about it. Neither do I. So, but there's a lot of people that study media that are in communication departments with people that do things like I do. I don't know what I do. And they're very focused on how different media create different kinds of effects. But this is one of these things, it's like, well, it's not just the medium as a piece of technology, it's the medium as it kind of appears at a certain historical moment. And at this historical moment, you could have a live studio audience that would be asking questions. I'm aware that daytime television has live studio audiences that sometimes speak, but the level of screening and the matters about which they are talking and everything that goes into making that possible, people being interviewed ahead of time, I just really don't believe, I didn't do any research, I could be wrong, I really don't believe they're doing the same kind of thing here. Because when you listen to these old shows and you do have a live studio audience, you just get a very different sense of how much control the studio producers and the producers of these television programs thought that they could exert over something like other people's discourse. Today, they're very confident that they can, and they know how to, and they can strain it in every conceivable way. But here, it's just like whatever people are going to say, they say.
That we should sell out the Ho Chi Minh and Mayo.
Buy them out.
Buy them out, yes. Not much difference. I'd like to remind you that before World War II, Prime Minister Chamberlain tried that with Hitler at Munich. You see what happened there.
Oh my God, the Munich guy, the classic guy. This guy's in every argument. Even today, there's always a guy who's like, "What about Munich?"
First you don't succeed, try again.
So you think we should try again?
Yes, dear.
You think so?
Yes, dear.
Even if you lose 7 or 8 million people each time you lose.
We're losing an
Get to
awful
the
lot of
evidence.
millions now, aren't we?
Well, to tell you the
We're
truth,
trying.
you
We're
think we
trying our
should,
best to lose them now.
you think
try
we should
harder.
try buying them out?
I think a total reversal
Yes,
of
dear.
our psychology would probably be a lot more sensible and might be, less people would be killed.
Less.
And a better feeling would ensue. And, see, our enemy's not really communism in terms.
This guy's like posture. He's just like kind of like leaning against the stage. I spent one summer as a security guard for concerts, and no fucking way, buddy. Back up.
Better feeling would ensue. And, see, our enemy's
Not
not really
allowed.
communism.
We would all be
in terms
standing
of
there. You
fight,
wouldn't be
fight,
able to
fight.
touch the stage.
Because
Are you
we've
kidding me?
made peace with communism in a way in Europe.
Insurance
After
rates.
much turmoil. And they slowly gentled down and become more democratic, as in Prague. The thing I found, specifically in Havana, was that the stronger the United States pushes in Havana, the stronger the police state forces there have power.
Yeah, well,
The more relaxed the scene, the stronger the liberal cats who like the Beatles have power.
they seem to have calmed down in Russia after half of Europe was turned over to the Russians.
And after 15 million people probably were killed between 35 and 53.
Mr. Buckley, I'd like to address this to you. I'd like first to know your views on the legal.
I like addressing a question to the host of a television program when you have you have Allen Ginsberg there, and you're like, I have a question for the host, but it does show how William F. Buckley Jr. was understood by his audience. Like, they understood what was happening, not as a host of a television show interviewing a kind of world class artist, intellectual world class. Why am I using that language? That's not my language. But anyway, you know what I mean. Yeah, he was a public intellectual, but really he was a media figure. But he had this presentation, this persona, that he was like the equal of everyone he interviewed. But it's maintained by his face. It's maintained by his voice and how he dresses. But it's weird because it has this thing where they'll ask him questions even though he's there every night. But the firing line is on.
Of marijuana, and also
Yeah, I mean, Joe wrote that's a different situation, I think, but I know what you're saying.
Thousands of people who are now in jail for I don't know how many years for the mere use of marijuana, not selling it, but just the mere use of it.
Well, in the first place, I dispute the figure.
30,000 is the figure.
Well, not hundreds of thousands, so I
30,000
correctly disputed the figure.
30,000
Okay,
are
now.
in jail.
Hundreds
The
or
arrest
thousands.
figures are much higher. The jail sentences reflect. See, the arrest figures. If you bust in California last year, precisely something like 57,000 people were busted. There, nationally, as far as I know, there's a little more than 30,000 in jail, which is a large group of people.
This is actually a people.
Oh, awful group of people.
Now, to answer your first question, I think that the studies on studies on marijuana are at this point
Marijuana.
inconclusive in suggesting that
Marijuana cracker?
that the use of that drug warrants a sentence that heavy. And I very much in favor of looking at the law again with reference to fresh research.
Me no think so.
But I don't think
Wanna
that this commits or should commit anybody to Mr. Ginsburg's position of total permissiveness. For this reason, a drug has
An herb. Yeah.
Oh, that's the other thing he
has
does. He always licks his
consequences
teeth.
or potential
But I'm not even going to try
consequences
to do
on
that.
individuals, which can completely and totally change their emotional lives and their physical lives. And under the circumstances, if one believes in anything as basic as public health, the kind of thing that
Here's
the
the eye gesture.
socialists were advocating 50, 60 years ago, Upton Sinclair. and so on.
Supercilious.
It won't-
So, Emerson says in his essay, Nature, I think it's on Nature. I don't remember what essay, but some essay Emerson writes that he's like, he just reminds you that superciliousness literally means like the raising of the eyebrow. You know, cilia, hair, super above. Supercilious is what we get here. Libertarian who wants incarceration for recreational drug use. Word to muffins. Welcome to William F. Buckley's Jr.'s political tradition. So the National Review. So firing line is the nice part of William F. Buckley left us. The other part of what he left us is a magazine, an old rag called the National Review. It's still in existence under different new management. And that pretty much sums it up, I think. You know, you go see for yourself. You can go read some of the National Review, see what you think about the current version of it. There's a definite strain, and I'm not a big fan of this argument that Quentin Skinner makes about freedom. So Quentin Skinner is an intellectual historian. Really, as far as intellectual historians go, probably a famous one, but that suggests that they're not very famous, you know. Oh, you're familiar with... Oh, maybe that was just Steve. But anyway, it's possible. Yeah, so it's possible that people know who Quentin Skinner is. Quentin Skinner has some nice work on different theories of freedom and liberation, and occasionally in some of his talks, he'll talk about American libertarians. He's like, things have gone off the rails with libertarianism. Oh, with the National Review, yeah. So Quentin Skinner's like, libertarianism doesn't understand even its own tradition of liberty, because in kind of the Roman legal tradition of liberty, liberty is, one, the status of not being a slave, and two, the ability to be autonomous in the sense of being able to make one's own law. And libertarians imagine freedom as the opposite of law. And Quentin Skinner's just like, well, they're anarchists. That's their tradition. They don't know their own tradition, you know.
So then what accepts the principle?
Are you taking a socialist position on the subject of drugs?
Certain socialists have certain correct insights. Everybody has certain
I would
correct
say
insights. You have some correct
certain
insights.
conservatives have the correct insight when they say the state should not be interfering within the bodies of the citizens.
Right. That's what libertarians like to say.
There's a limit to
yeah,
how much the police can go inside.
I tend to be sympathetic, but
yeah, I would wish you would think along that line.
I've thought a great deal on that.
No, I mean, here's the pot
Here's
problem.
the distinction, Mr. Ginsberg, is that with certain categories of drugs, people become people are not merely happy to enjoy them themselves, or rather to kill them to kill themselves, but they actively try to contaminate other people.
Well, now, with
You want some of this, little kid? Come here, little baby child. Have some of this drug. When I ingest this drug, it makes me want to give it to you.
I think that's a problem.
No, with pot, I don't think it is.
So, and we're discussing the legalization of pot.
Yeah,
or
but,
at least
but that's why I use the generic word.
Yes, the reefer madness argument.
Some drugs,
Exactly.
yeah.
Assassin of youth.
And those laws, I think,
Reefer
might not ought to
madness.
do.
I'm down on amphetamine. I think amphetamine is a plague.
With the perfect accent.
I think the cure for amphetamine is send the amphetamine heads, meth freaks, as they're called, out to cabins in the woods. Health.
Well, I'm also
Down
glad we
on
got
junk.
over
I think it's a cure to the junk problem and the crime problem.
It is sometimes depressing. I understand why people don't like history, because it's depressing. Because you're like, oh, it is relevant. That's the problem.
Send them to doctors, English system, and I think the English system does work.
No, it doesn't, by the way.
Yeah, yes, it does, by the way. Did you know?
Yeah.
Relevant.
They don't have a
that's
problem
relevant.
like we have here. You
Yeah,
know.
well, the problem is growing enormously. They started
There's
off with only
3,000%.
50,000 addicts. Yeah.
No, they started with like several hundred addicts, and they now have, 2,000 in a city of 8 million, London, whereas we have 50,000 to 100,000 in New York City alone.
In New York City alone. But the point is that even the people who defended the English system when it was experimented with 5-6 years ago are saying that it isn't working because...
No, that's not quite true. The only people who are really against it are Anslinger, the former head of the Narco Bureau, and the Fuzz, who have been propagandizing against the English system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, notice one of the things that Ginsberg's really doing well, and Steve, you and I were recently in a conversation where people were talking about Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin, the theorist of language and of discourse, and having these multiple modalities, where Ginsberg's really good at mixing these up for effect, of being like, no, I think that's not quite right, and then calling the police the Fuzz. Having different kinds of registers, dialectical moments kind of encounter each other in the same speech, so that his speech never represents like a way of speaking, because there are many ways of speaking that find themselves in his speech. And this is a way of, I mean, beyond just the various kinds of things that it can do in making particular kinds of political or social or aesthetic arguments, it's a way of being an individual in a discourse.
Wrong. And
Well,
I
know about it
tell you
more
why,
than you on
because
this,
doctors refuse to administer drugs in the dosage that a true addict requires. Under the circumstances, you get the black market for them simultaneously.
No,
But you can't expect a doctor to give you a lethal amount of dose of drugs if
that
that's
wasn't-
what you ask him.
Doctors would never give people lethal amounts of drugs, because toxicology has not been around since the 16th century. Because you will inevitably give people lethal amounts of drugs when you give them medicine, because they can take it all at once. He knows Buckley won't be persuaded by these flips, but that's his... Yeah, Buckley's not his audience, you know? It's like, it's one of the weird things about the interview as a form. I mean, even for us, it's hard for me to remember that the interview is a very modern form of discourse. Potentially, I mean, I don't ever believe fully in it having a single origin point, but Horace Greeley, of all people, and in the 19th century with newspapers, and when Horace Greeley's going around trying to interview people at first, they're like, what the fuck? Like, no, I'm not going to, like, what do I get out of this relationship? Nothing. But the interview becomes a kind of model of discourse, especially when it's presented for others, because what do you get? You get publicity. And we understand what that means now. But early on, when the interview was being invented, people didn't understand publicity. They're like, what? Why am I going to answer your questions? Who the fuck are you? They're still imagining the encounter as being that face-to-face encounter. To be good at interviewing and be good at giving an interview, you have to understand that complexity of the audience, that the interaction that you're having has to appear kind of personal, but it has to be not about the person you're talking to. He wants the audience to think about how he's speaking to Buckley. It dialogues his position as well. Exactly. He's using the interview form in order to further something that's very much outside of the scope of what we typically imagine an interview of being for. He really is brilliant, isn't he? Ginsberg. If you don't read a lot of poetry and you're just kind of, for somehow you ended up here, you might take a look at Allen Ginsberg. It might make you like poetry more than you like it.
Wasn't the problem in England. The problem in England was that so many refugee junkies were coming to America, from America to London, to get away from the police state here and go to doctors there, that it unbalanced the whole junk market there. Simple as that. Caused an increase in but a small increase, like from 500 to 2,000. But you got to remember, that's not a big problem because they don't go out and steal. Whereas here, in New York alone, according to Mayor Lindsay's narcotics coordinator Ramirez and Rockefeller's coordinator Pierce, junkies steal $10 million a day, third of $1 billion a year, to pay for junk. Or according to a statement by Justice Botine a few days ago, I saw in the Times, half of the crime in New York is associated with junk or thefts, robberies, muggings to get
I
money
don't
for
deny
junk.
that, but I'm simply denying that the way to the way to meet that problem is to do what I myself once advocated until I found out it had failed in England, which was simply to give anybody all the drugs they wanted.
No, that's not the way. The way
I wanted to give everyone all the drugs they wanted, and then when I thought that didn't work, what I decided was that we should throw them in jail and let them rot.
would be to have them go to doctors or clinics, which they're doing in England now, that keeps the drugs from flowing around through mafia, black market, and police. On the
Safe injection sites. Ends up being the very practical, realistic, EU-sponsored policy many years later. Maybe the people in your own moment that sound like crazy, visionary, absurd people, maybe they're speaking the policy consensus 60 years before it arrives.
streets. See, I live in the Lower East Side.
So you're in favor of illegalizing, or rather maintaining the illegal traffic in certain kinds of drugs?
No. I'm in favor of eliminating all illegal traffic in amphetamines and heroin by putting it in the hands of a doctor. And I'm in favor of legalizing pot and LSD. That's the big hard argument.
We're still having that argument.
Yeah. But presumably your position...
I wonder what shirts you could have if you wanted to legalize LSD. We used to have, like, it was very clear with the marijuana leaf, you would be like, legalize it. And then the it was the, what would you put on the legalize it for LSD shirt? Could be anything. It could be like Krishnamurti, like the 10,000 forms of Krishna. Or it could just be like some guy taking a shit. It could be anything. The opening screen of the show. Legalize it. And it's just William F. Buckley going.
LSD might change, might it not, if, let's say, a year or two from now it became conclusively established that what doctors are now saying about LSD, namely they can absolutely derange you and permanently in certain cases, turns out to be confirmed?
The thing about acid is that the number of derangements, social breakdown, is about the same as for getting married or working on a television program.
That's so fucking good. I love Allen Ginsberg. God, I love him. He's so fucking funny. Just the absolute dry, like it's so dry that it doesn't even sound comic. He's just like, yeah, it turns out to be a fact that your exact profession is about as deranged as taking LSD. What's up, aliens? Came in at the right time. I could use it. Yeah, I don't know what time it is in India right now, but thanks for coming to the stream. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I should say this if you're long time, new time. I'm trying to actually make an effort to do more with the YouTube version of this. I've actually started editing videos of these streams rather than just dumping them there. So I'll edit this stream too when I get a chance. It might take me some time because I'm still getting my sea legs on that. But very cold, foggy morning. Oh, foggy mornings are some of my favorite kinds of mornings. But I hope that you are not too cold to enjoy the like last couple minutes of this amazing interview with William F. Buckley and Allen Ginsberg. I don't know if this means anything to other people, but this interview is so good. It's so good. Foggy entire day and nights. Okay, if it's foggy entire day and nights, then that's too much. Wow, that's too much. That can be really disorienting. That's a very obvious thing to say, but
Statistically.
Well, I can say
or any normal stressful human
if
occupation.
you want to play that, I can tell you statistically, fewer people get killed fighting in Vietnam than driving around college, which isn't a good excuse for having a perpetual war in Vietnam.
Yeah, but fewer people get have nervous breakdowns from LSD than from going to psychiatrists or working for Time magazine. So the statistics are actually, according to Dr. Sidney Cohen,
that's like saying, look, only 17 people.
yeah, it's weird because like the last time I did a stream, we did like a debate that just happened, and this is so. I mean, this is actually presented as an interview, but this is a better debate than the debate. Which makes me maybe rethink some of the things I've been telling my students about debate. That like all of the formal things that debate does that are important in order to construct things, even though it's artificial, like it does, maybe not. Maybe it's just like, maybe that's a lost cause. And we need to get rid of all of that because it just kind of, people get psyched out by the formality of it and they just do these weird things and like, it just, whatever it's supposed to be doing, it's just not working. I don't know. I have to kind of go home and think. Yeah, they both understand they're in a debate. It's more like they're like the adversaries, like drawing the swords in the ritualistic manner, and they've both been trained in a rhetorical tradition. Buckley by the Jesuits and Ginsberg by English literature. But damn, you're right. It is kind of a lost art. Audience benefits, and we do from their interaction. The audience doesn't think. Yeah, it's kind of like this thing with Jean-Paul Hahn, where that I've been. I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but Jean-Paul Hahn, who is a French literary critic, wrote this book called The Flowers of Tarbes, which is translated in English, so you can read it if you don't read French. And there's a moment in the book where he's like, it's something for, even though it's like it should be really obvious to me because of what I do for a living, but it just kind of clicked, something that I've been close to understanding but never understood until he said it. It's something like when we don't believe something, we hear speech as words. We're like, oh, I'm taken in by the words that you're saying. When we believe it, it's not words, it's ideas. So it's the same kind of thing with the debate. Like when we go to a debate, like when it's a debate event, it's not actually the thing. It's like an image of what the thing could be. And maybe we have some respect for that in an abstract way. Like when the thing is real. And so I've started saying this to my students. I'm like, if you could choose, if a friend came to you and was like, would you want to go hear a speech tonight or anything else? And they're always like, anything else. I'm like, exactly. So we're in a public speaking class and we want to move people. Don't give a speech. Just speak. Just speak to us. Speak to us right now. What do you have to say? It's going to be better than the speech that you thought you were giving. Same thing here, I think.
People have dropped into Niagara Falls by trying to cross it on a tightrope, therefore they should be permitted to continue to do so.
Well, then what are you going to do, ban marriage? Are you going to ban marriage? You can't ban normal, stressful activities, things that...
So, aliens, I think that's an interesting idea, so that maybe the reason why in a debate the debate's actually even worse for public discourse because you're forced to maintain a stance, whereas in something like an interview, it's kind of looser what your position is. That's an interesting hypothesis, but here I don't think either of them is kind of changing their stance or their position. It's more a question of style, like the civility that you feel is a kind of stylistic choice that they're making in how they're presenting their positions and their arguments. I don't think that, there's definitely something to what you're saying, and there are people that have held that thesis and done research on it, people like Deborah Tannen, who have suggested that we have an argument culture that's oppositional, and therefore, she's a linguist, and therefore that oppositional argument style, like on television, means that we don't get as good of a public discourse as if we had a more conversational style. But personally, I don't totally agree with that. I think that there's a difference between an argumentative style and an antagonistic style. I think an argumentative style means I'm interested in persuading you, rather than I'm just interested in defeating you. I think that's the difference that I feel that's the biggest one here.
It involves courage,
mostly with
exploration.
Ginsberg.
You can't ban them because, there are dangers inherent in every breath you take. The dangers with acid, I'm saying, are statistically not greater than the dangers with any normal stressful activity, and I'm citing Dr. Sidney Cohen's own statistics for that.
Well, they are...
You know what those statistics are?
I don't know Sidney Cohen. Do you, Steve, know who Sidney Cohen? I'm sure he's like somebody everybody would know at this time, but I don't know who that is.
Yes, I do. Okay. There are, as you know and as I know, different views about LSD, but the most recent information on LSD is...
From whom?
Well, I forget where I saw it. Is that it can actually cause people to simply lose permanent control of their brain. Now, I think it's very...
I'm sorry, I just took some LSD. I lost control of my brain permanently.
It's a question, should you therefore allow people to do that under certain circumstances if they know clearly what they're doing?
I would
and I might be
question
sympathetic
the
to the
language
permissive.
lose permanent control of their brain. I think
Yeah.
the language there would be inaccurate.
Yeah, maybe so. I hope so. It's nice to see you.
Okay. Salam.
Salam. Salam alaikum. Mashallah. Salam. This is really great. I'm curious what you all of you think of what we just watched. I know Aliens, you came in kind of late, so you're probably what the fuck is this? But that was so delightful to me. I love that so much. I love that. Yeah, that's such a good point. It's permanently changing your brain is also what we call education. Yeah. So the idea that drugs affect your... So I'm gonna put my cards on the table here about something that nobody else cares about. You think it's going to be my opinions on drugs. It's not. It's my opinion on modality and arguments about modality and how the brain comes into it. So what's modality? Let's talk about... Kids, we're going to talk about modality. Actuality, possibility, necessity, existence. These are different modal descriptors of things. And we have different argument forms that go along with those, or different ideas about what makes something necessary or actual or possible, those kinds of things. So they become really important in arguments all the time. When people say that something is hardwired in your brain, or when it affects the brain, when it changes the brain's chemistry or the brain's structure, the brain's function, it is sometimes a reference to some scientific literature. Sometimes. And I'll talk about that in a second. But most of the time, it's just a claim about modality made with not even an attempt to refer to a specific piece of evidence. When we say that something's hardwired, what we're saying is that it's necessary for the individual, that it can't be changed. It's not something that's possible to change. But even in the cases when it is a reference to scientific literature, it's under the interpretation of those scientific findings as proving a modal claim about necessity. Because people believe that the brain, not everybody, there's this idea of brain plasticity, neuroplasticity. It's a different modal argument. It's just that the brain has more possibility, more potentiality. It's not just necessary. But those arguments are often about that. So I don't think that means that our brain, when I make that claim, I'm not saying that I don't think that our brains are affected. They obviously are. That's how drugs work. Duh. But I am also suspicious of the claims that people make around brain chemistry and brain function and brain structure, because I often think that really it's a disguised claim about necessity. That's what I think is happening. Sue me. Sue me. Shoot bullets through me. I like this idea of bringing people to deliberately challenge. Peterson doesn't do this. Rogan doesn't do this. Yeah. I mean, it is like people will always accuse you of being nostalgic, and trust me, I am not nostalgic for 1968. Not only was I not alive, there's lots not to like about 1968, but there are things about those moments when people. And I think it goes back to that idea about the televisual medium that I was talking about before. Before people, like, I'm not very old, but I'm old enough to remember the internet being different than it is now. Because people didn't figure out how to extract perfectly money from it yet. So there's a lot of experimental stuff, and because people didn't know enough, it was so much better in a lot of ways. Ways that can never come back, because they won't work in the economic ecosystem of the current internet. Same thing with television. Like, this probably was, this was a successful program. It was good, but it was also a kind of risk. But you were able to take a risk, even as someone who's just concerned about money, because you didn't know what would make money. But if you know that a reality show that you can produce for a small amount of money, much smaller than a drama or a news program or a cultural program. Give me a bullshit. Fuck off. If you know that a reality program is going to make money, why would you take a risk to not make that money if it's a bankable thing? So this kind of knowledge isn't just that there's like bad versions of this, like there's bad versions of the firing line like Crossfire or something. It's that there's less room for experimentation. So when people say capitalism leads to innovation, capitalism leads to a lot of things. Capitalism sometimes can lead to innovation, not always good innovations. That's another question. But capitalism could also lead to stagnation. It really fucking depends on what we're talking about, you know? So Word of Muffin says, I love that handle, by the way. That's awesome. It's interesting. Buckley pretty openly doesn't even respect Ginsberg, and it's hard to see this dynamic playing out on modern television without just a shouting match. Yeah. The David Foster Wallace, people have mixed opinions about David Foster Wallace, but he has one short story about going on David Letterman. And I say this with some trepidation because I know Steve is a big fan of David Letterman, but he talks about this person who's going on David Letterman and the kind of like ironic power play. It's an analysis of the ironic power play between the guest and the host on a television show, late night television show. And I think that one of the other things, the kind of pieces of media knowledge that made it more difficult for this kind of thing to appear, was that people like Johnny Carson and David Letterman and maybe more news magazine type hosts of this time were learning things about the medium and how to use various rhetorical techniques to kind of make the environment feel friendly, so that someone being a little bit oppositional would make them seem bad. Because Buckley invites opposition, you don't when Ginsberg is like opposing him a little bit, you're like, that's normal. But if you have a whole band, if you have like a 12-piece band introducing you, it's kind of hard then to be oppositional, isn't it? It's hard to go on and be like, you invited me on the show and you gave me a great welcome, but I'm here to kind of contest you. So it makes it harder for those things to appear because we know how to constrain them through various techniques. I don't know. Maybe I'm overstating the case there, but the same things apply to caffeine and alcohol, but they are both useful for productivity and social activity, so aren't subject to the same amount of scrutiny. Yeah, I mean, but they were at different points. I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, Murad IV, I think it's Murad IV, bans tobacco and caffeine, and like they were legal before the Ottoman Empire, and he just bans them, and people are like, oh shit. And there's underground activities, but there are changing conceptions of what's productive and what's non-productive. I mean, he put severe penalties on this. In Mormonism, caffeine is not allowed. It's seen as an intoxicant. So the idea of productivity is itself not so obvious what that means, especially when in relationship to like the individual body and not just like at work. I mean, even at work, I think it's not so obvious, but much less so in this kind of broad social sense. What do we really mean by productivity? If you go to look how GDP is measured, if that's your kind of model of productivity, you'll be like, it seems kind of arbitrary, and it kind of is. LC is very productive for my social activities. Yeah, I think I'm kind of surprised. People sometimes use LSD in a social way that is shocking to me because it would be overwhelming to me, where people would just like drop some acid and then go to a party. You are brave souls. I salute you. Speaking and generalizing historically, are you basically saying that curation of media is what allows these kinds of debates? Yeah, it's. I guess I'm trying to. I don't know if I'm not saying it's the only thing. There's a lot that goes into it, but I think that whenever we're in a medium in its earlier stages, there's more possibilities, which seems counterintuitive because we think, oh, there's more possibilities when we figure out how a technology works. We can do more things with it. Wow, we're at the next gen console. We can do so much more. But is that actually true? Like if you think about next gen games and you have the AAA studios, the economics around the technology itself are part of what you see there. And so you start to see things that are a lot more similar. One thing that I think about sometimes, especially whenever I'm babysitting my nephews, is the way that children's shows look today. Because children's shows that are animated all look the same to me. Because there's powerful and cheaply available technology to do fax expressions and to do this all in a 3D digital environment where it's all kind of the same. And I feel like a lot is lost. You might not care about children's animation or like children's literature, things like that. But I think that if I were going to make a plea for why that's important, if you think that what children learn is important for the kind of democracy you get, their imagination is also important for the kind of democracy we get. And so children's literature and children's art, which is in a large way creating the elements of what children's imaginations are, the more similar it becomes, the more one-dimensional our democracy might be. So I feel like sometimes in that moment of trying to figure things out, we get more kinds of aesthetic possibilities, even if we don't have this powerful technology. So maybe I'm a little conservative in that respect, but that's kind of what I think. We used to have such a wacky variety, but now anything deviating from the norm isn't just... I mean, it's so like that we have Samsung and Apple actually in litigation about curved corners, like is this intellectual property to have a little bit of curvature in your corners? And so I mean, there are many factors that go into that intellectual property law, and but it is also just the knowledge of how to extract profit, money from a technology, and when you don't know that, you got to try more things. So it's kind of weird. Like capitalism creates innovation, but kind of creates it despite itself. Like it creates it in the moment when it doesn't know how to make profit. Once it figures it out, it doesn't need to innovate. It's like, I'm good. Just sit on this IP. I got a monopoly. Okay. The kids show point is a good one. Maybe the harm is that there's nothing to identify with except the form of the show itself. There's no distinction in the characters of the expressions. Yeah, that's kind of what I think. Like, I don't know. I have some, Crazy Cat is the I've made the branding of this ridiculous channel and stuff. So obviously I have some investments in this but I think that that kind of sameness of expression. I gave a talk yesterday. It was kind of a hot mess to some of the undergraduates here about the history of interpreting facial expressions, and I talked about the work of Paul Ekman. And he's like, there are 6 basic expressions that every culture universally shares. I don't know why I'm doing my Jordan Peterson voice. Actually, I didn't know I had a Jordan Peterson voice until right now. That's pretty good. I hope I can do it again when I'm imitating Jordan Peterson and not Paul Ekman, who's not Canadian or anything. But there's a lot of research to suggest that this idea, what Paul Ekman suggests, is that there's this universalizable thing isn't quite right. And he says he's based on the work of Darwin, and I think Darwin's a lot more interesting on facial expressions. Darwin writes this whole book on the expression of emotions in man and animal that is just like a really cool book. If you're interested in Darwin and evolution, you don't know Darwin till you know the expressions book, because he does not sound like the Darwin that you know. He sounds Lamarckian in a lot of weird ways. So, but there's also just tons of interesting things in that book. Weird things. He talks about his walking his dog. You know, you get this more personal sense of Darwin. He's always kind of personal, but you get an even more personal sense in that book, I think. Okay, that's a long digression on whatever point I was trying to make, which was, the Paul Ekman's theory of the facial expressions has influenced the animation technology of how to produce expressions that you see in Pixar movies. You basically see in every kind of animation today. So if you believe that research reflects the universal truth of all emotions, then that's just the progress of technology. We just have a technology that is. But if that research maybe isn't the expression of the universal truth of every human emotion ever, maybe what we have is kind of an artistic form using a technology that conforms to an idea of human emotion that's just not quite right. And so it makes us see everything in that way. We train ourselves on seeing that version of human emotion on the face. And kids will see that even more because that's all that they're getting. It reminds me of what another YouTuber, like I'm a fucking YouTuber, a way more popular YouTuber than me, Adam Neely, he's talking in one of his videos about how people who are trained on modern music have problems because modern music is auto-tuned. So literally their vocal cords are going to be formed differently when they're trying to match auto-tuned music than we're trying to match earlier music that doesn't have auto-tune to it. And I'm not talking about T-Pain auto-tune. I'm not talking about auto-tune where you could hear it. Auto-tune is mostly done when you can't hear it, because auto-tune technology is actually very sophisticated. So when you hear the auto-tune, that's someone turning it up and saying, I'm going to make auto-tune into style, rather than trying to disguise what it doesn't need to be disguised, because it's where the voice sounds human, where the voice has timbre and brightness and sound to it that's a little bit lost on the auto-tune. Anyway, that's a long digression. Crazy Cat is cited by Kerouac as one of the primary foundations of the beast. Are you serious? I did not know that. Or I did. If I did, I'm surprised I would have forgotten that. That's so cool. I did not know that. But it makes a lot of sense. There is a kind of... Crazy Cat, I think, is like one of these... There's a lot of stuff, in especially in like the first half of the 20th century in American culture, that is so rich with stuff for this moment. Like, one of the things that's very interesting in Crazy Cat... It's one of the obvious things when you learn about Crazy Cat and what it is. That people are like, oh, that could have existed in the 30s? Crazy Cat is agender. Like in the comics, their pronoun shift, she, he, they. It's like every pronoun conceivable. Crazy Cat is in all these different romantic triangles that are ambiguous. They have gender ambiguity, and people are like, what? But it's also from that time, so it's also different in what that means. I love it. I love Crazy Cat. It's in the Playboy article. So I must have read. I think I read the Playboy article because you've talked to me about it before. So maybe I did know that. Interesting. Let's. So okay, Word of Muffin sent me a video a long ass time ago. Let me go check this out. It's a little. I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to come back. It's kind of late, but I'm going to come back. You don't have to stay. This has been great already. Thank you so much for coming. But yeah, you sent me that YouTube link. So take a 5-minute break. I'm going to come back to that. If we have time, if it's like, I don't know how long it is, but I might just do it tonight. Or if not, I'll definitely do it for the next stream because I'm always looking for good content. But I'll be back in 5 minutes. And if you're still here, we'll chat a little bit more. Okay. The next step in my Twitch evolution is coming up with one of those intertitles. This is how in touch I am with the intertitles. What is it called? The things that come in between where you are not, you're AFK. I need one of those kinds of things. But anyway, thanks for hanging out. And let's check out this link. Oh, and thank you, Steve, for that. Oh, no. Oh, no. I can't watch this. This is somebody who knows me. How dare you? How dare you? Who the fuck is this? That's pretty funny, though. That's pretty funny. Oh, no. I'm not watching myself. That's. I mean, there's enough narcissism in just doing this, but there's also certain things that cannot happen. But anyway, thank you for trolling me that way, whoever the fuck you are. Okay. That's probably gonna mean that I'm gonna call it a night here. But it's been great. And maybe I'll just hang out. We can chat a little bit more if anybody wants to. If you're still here. I think you are. I have to get set up. Okay, now I know who you are. But I like your screen name. It was. I would not have guessed. 2010. Well, we can do 2010. We could do 2010. It's 2010. Okay. Let me try it again. Well, I mean, do we really want to do that though? I feel like I feel like we could do something more interesting, but I did give my word that I would definitely do it this time or the next time. So I am constrained by honor, I guess. Honor, but a breath. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at it. What the fuck, dude? All right, we're watching a debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the
tuna.
final round.
So tuna, just a word on tuna. Tuna passed some time ago, and I don't want to say too much, but I just want to say that I didn't know him very closely, but the times that I had with him, he struck me as an example. Not necessarily one I would want to follow, but it was a fucking example.
2010 Robert Hubert debates here at the University of Vermont.
Woo! This is a debate. Do we know what the topic is? Does it say it in the description?
Today we look forward to an outstanding debate between four excellent teams.
Doesn't say anything.
Our first proposition team is from St. John's University.
This is some fucking damn shit, dude.
Our first opposition team is from the Big Red of Cornell.
Okay.
This is also from Cornell. The opposition team is from the Claremont. Thank you for attending.
Prime Minister, I'll officially call the highest order. Tuna is already.
Okay, so if you're coming to the stream and you're not the person that sent me this link, you need some understanding of what's happening here. This is a college debate tournament in the British parliamentary style at the University of Vermont in 2010. Why are we watching this? Probably because the person who sent it to me is in it. So in a debate, you get assigned a side. So there's some kind of proposition, and then you get told what to do in these college debates. I know, yeah, aliens. Aliens is like, what the fuck? But anyway, this is what's happening. This is why I'm freaking out, because I'm like, oh, God, I'm going to listen to one of these things. But anyway, let's listen to the first speech.
What, give all social benefits in the form of vouchers.
So the debate proposition is that all social benefits should be in the form of vouchers.
That's vouchers.
Yeah, it is, dude. I know.
Stephen Boyle will be our chair. I want to thank you for attending, and now let's see an awesome debate.
I'll officially call the highest order. Tuna has already introduced the motion, so I'll call on the Prime Minister to open up the case.
Yeah. I'm just going to let Steve finish his idea of the tuna gesture. Time for me to get out of the way of the debate by sitting right in the middle of it. I think this is also, I'm gonna give him a slight benefit of the doubt and being like, this is just like the camera is not important to what's happening in his mind. But given the fact that this has 163 views, you know, not a huge amount of views, but enough. Like, there's not 163 people in this room, so the video is always more important. Something we learned now.
Mr. Speaker, it's very rare that we can get a debate motion that can boil down very simply to one word. But we think that one word that this motion boils down to is responsibility. We think responsibility lies at the core of what any social welfare program should be about. And we believe that this responsibility, both on the part of the government and on the part of the citizenry that are accepting these social welfare payments, are best facilitated when they're in the form of vouchers. And we're going to talk about certain forms of social welfare payments. And we get into my two arguments. First of all, that this is a check on misuse, and how social welfare money can be misused, and why this misuse is especially harmful to the essential goals behind it, and what the responsibility is when you're using money that's coming from the tax pool. And second of all, this idea of
yeah, aliens, all of us here, apparently, now I know who Word of Muffins is. Know what's happening here. So we're very interested in what you think about this strange ritual you're about to witness. It's also kind of making me feel like after the 3 doorbell interruptions we had in the firing line episode, this is like the Seder play that comes after the tragedy.
promoting responsibility vouchers. And
So it's a good
promoting
closing.
through, like, the choices that are still able to be made, as opposed to like a government program that would retain all these sorts of things in the status quo. So we would say that, like, in both aspects, when it comes to like what a government should be doing responsibly, what a citizenry should be doing responsibly, we think that we solve both these aspects. We think that this will make for a better, will solve these sorts of problems that will go on. We're going to define social welfare payments as any payment that provides like for a basic quality of life. We would call this like unemployment insurance would go under this, food stamps, healthcare benefits, like or health, some form of health insurance. Like, we believe that these should come in the form of vouchers
Just like how absurd it is, basically, on a scale of 1 to 7.
to be spent on these things, as opposed to just either A, be given these things from like an overriding government program, or B, just be given the money without any restrictions on how this can be used. Because the key thing to a voucher is that there are restrictions on what this can be used, and there are restrictions on what they can be used for. We say that this would be very reasonable in this specific circumstance. Like, first of all, let's check on.
So this is kind of nice that we get the uniqueness argument right in the beginning of the speech. So sometimes when people are thinking about debate, this pattern comes up a lot where you usually notice it when it doesn't happen, when things go bad, where people are like, this problem is terrible, or like, we need to do this, and people are like, well, why do we need to uniquely do this, or what's this? How is it different from what we're already doing? And then people be like, oh, I don't know. So here we can see, well, what makes vouchers unique from just any kind of transfer payment? They have some restrictions on what they can be used. So it's not like legal tender currency can be used on anything. So it's these restrictions is what we're really arguing about. Do you just tell a woman to sit down? Sexist. So in this format of debate, because debates have these kind of their own rules based on their formats in collegiate debate, and it's kind of roughly based on British parliamentary procedure in a rough way, where there are these kinds of points of information that you can get. It's really more based on what they do at the Oxford Union than it's based on the British Parliament. But so you can be like, excuse me, and you hold your wig, like, excuse me, dear, good sir, good gentleman, I have a question about the colonies, or something like that. And your colleague may allow you to ask a question, but it is not considered rude to have them sit down, because it's just not considered rude here, basically. But if you're watching it, you're like, that seems rude, right? So this is some weird etiquette that comes out of this particular practice.
Issues. Like, the reason why government would give social welfare programs
Oh, hey, what's up, George?
is because they feel that there's a necessity in, like, making sure that these people have an overriding quality of life. Like, these people have to accept this money not because it's been given to them, but because they need it in order to maintain this quality of life. And when we're talking about something in the course of necessity, or we're talking.
Okay, now I actually know who everyone is. I was now I understand what's happening.
About necessity that's coming from the tax money of citizens that are working, or corporations that are in that certain circumstance. We believe that there's a responsibility.
George, I'm sorry.
Part of the government to use that money responsibly and parsimoniously, to both use it on things that will provide for these goods going forward, and to use as little of it as possible, because they recognize the burden that this places on other members of the citizenry going forward. And I'm
sorry, I wasn't listening to any of your arguments because you just left.
To use that money responsibly and parsimoniously, to both use it on things that will provide for these goods going forward,
It's
and
so
to
fast.
use as little of it as possible.
This is the
because they
slow
recognize
debate,
the
though, right?
burden that this places.
That's the funny thing, is that this kind of style of debate was understood as slow debate. Like, people would literally call it that, be like, you do slow debate in college.
On other members of the citizenry going forward. And we believe that these vouchers allow for restrictions on where this money is given, and we believe that's tantamount to the terms of a contract. Like, when you accept the terms of a working contract, we believe that there are certain rights and responsibilities given to you in the first place. We believe this represents, or more responsibly, to a bond company. We recognize that you give someone money, you can place restrictions on when they have to pay you back, or when they have to pay you back, or what restrictions they can do with that money. And we believe that in that specific circumstance, when you give a group of money, we've seen you need protections against that. You need protections on what that group of people can do.
This is really cute, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think this is not a terrible argument. I'm sure George has a different feeling about bonds markets today than he did at the time. But I think thinking about what kind of responsibility you have when you take on a certain kind of payment makes sense. Yeah, there's a time limit to all of these speeches. There's 7 minutes, and they're expected to take 1 or 2 questions during them. So in the first And the 6th minute, you'll hear after the first minute, there's this terrible clap. And that means that people can ask questions. And then towards the end of the speech, you'll hear another like terrible clap where someone will do it. They try to do it to make you as jostled as possible. And then there can be no more questions. So in the middle 5 minutes of the speech, there could be questions. That's when he keeps sitting all the way down.
Unemployment insurance without any checks on it can be used in a number of harmful ways. Like we believe.
And it does look really ridiculous. You just keep sitting people down. It's like, if you didn't know the rules, this would just seem like a Monty Python sketch or something.
Shown by like economic evidence are especially vulnerable to buying cigarettes, to buying alcohol, to gambling, and all these other sorts of like social sins and social crimes. So we would say in this specific circumstance,
it's the mini game. Whack-a-mole is the mini game that you play while you're arguing.
Allow the money coming from the general citizenry in order to provide a social good to be spent on a social harm. We feel that would be fundamentally unreasonable. We would say in this specific circumstance, like a citizenry has the full well to respect to say, like, we're giving you unemployment insurance because you're not working. You better damn well be using it on things that are responsible.
Okay, the other thing is like what's happening with the knocking or the clapping in the background is people are allowed to do that when they like an argument. So it seems kind of aggressive, and it is, but it's aggressive agreement.
This also happens with food stamps because now in New York law there's a proposal in New York law to restrict like the buying of high fructose corn syrup, which is connected to like obesity going forward. So we believe that you can also connect this to like other forms, not just with employment insurance. And we believe that ultimately, we would say that this wouldn't apply to like everyone in a society that they would have to use their money responsibly, because most people in their society derive their money from their own labor, from labor they make under their own free choice.
Their own free labor, George. The question is, are they people who agree with the argument, or are they just others at St. John's teams being his hype squad?
They're deriving this money from someone else's labor that's being come in the form of taxes. And we believe that when it's coming from someone else's labor, they should have a check on how you use it. And we believe that that check is essential, and that check will come in the form of double take back tax.
Great, yeah, so if you're going to generalize this and have like unemployment too, which you actually pay into, how is that promoting any kind of responsibility?
Well, we believe it's promoting responsibility by just making sure, like, first of all, like, this idea that it just comes from money you pay into, that's not exactly true. Like, money will still be funded from these things, from the progressive tax base as a whole. And second of all,
nice taxation argument. Be like, look, we don't yet have modern monetary theory, and I am going to assume that taxation is what pays for government spending. But in light of that, it's progressive taxation, so sit the fuck down.
All this idea of you should, even if you're paying into the system, we believe that the system is going to be
this is the Seder play of this stream. Sorry, George, we're not doing you justice.
Still right on the part of the government to restrict that going forward. We believe the government has to act in like the best interest of society in this specific circumstance, and we believe that they have a responsibility to, and they would be negligent if they didn't do otherwise. And now I'm getting into this point of like promoting responsible use. Because they say, like, well, I'm sure I'm just going to come up and say one way to this problem. Well, why not just, like, take a bunch of taxpayer money and, like, give everyone these things? Like, in the case of, like, healthcare insurance, why not just have a nationalized healthcare system and just give everyone health insurance? Or why not just, why not just have, like, a nationwide system of, like, homeless shelters, like, feeding the hungry? And we
nationwide system of homeless shelters. No, I'm not laughing at you, George, though. If you're still here, you're probably not, because I would not be here if it were me. But, like, I definitely said the same kind of things, because it's just, you know, you're in the vibe. Nationwide is on your side. A nationwide system of homeless shelters.
Harms of these things going forward. Please, we believe that when you give someone a voucher to pay for these things, you also give them the responsibility to make choices within the certain.
Give them the responsibility. That's like a nice, like, if you were going to consult for a revivified Margaret Thatcher, you know, like, how could you make Margaret Thatcher woke? Something like that might help.
Like a voucher system sets parameters on what you can do. Like we would say that people still have like different nutritional needs, for example, and we would expect that most people, like with the restriction to buy healthy food, would require certain types of foods to be most optimally healthy for them going forward. We recognize that there's a varying number of needs in nutrition going forward, and we believe that people should take responsibility, analyze their own needs, and make this decision rather than have this decision made in a top-down way. Like we believe that people should...
Wait. If you want people to analyze the decision for themselves, then why put restrictions on it? I don't understand how this argument helps your position. But you say it with enough vehemence. Maybe I'm not following it closely enough. But is there an equal responsibility from the system side to ensure they aren't asserting too much control? Yeah, that's a good question. You should try to stand up and ask it. See how it goes.
That's the right to make this decision because we feel that because of their unique position, they're in the best position to make it. We would say that this would also apply to
This is cathartic,
like some people need healthcare insurance.
It's very uncanny, but funny too.
Because maybe they get a lot of cold. Maybe they just have to go in a lot of the time. Or maybe if there's a risk of terminal illness in their family, they would have to get a health insurance that would protect them from like a massive cost down the road. We recognize each insurance program has different strengths and weaknesses and will protect them differently. And we would say in this specific circumstance, where healthcare needs also are very varied, that we would say that you should better take responsibility for this program as opposed to like a panacea formula on the part of the government that says this is what you need. This is what you need in this specific circumstance. And we believe that this is partially responsible for the failure of the welfare state in general because of the massive debts that they bring up. And because like this money is viewed as an investment in people that really need it, we find that when you are promoting a responsible spending on the part of this money and be like a personal responsibility in spending in certain areas rather than a prescribed like minimum that's been given to you. Like we say that this money gets lost. We would say that the nations that provide these services
it's like a sock in the dryer.
Because the money they're spending doesn't come back with the type of economic growth that we realize they can't tax. We believe that in that specific circumstance.
The thing is this is not like it's not substantially worse than what you would hear on a new evening news program, is it? I mean,
you need to promote responsibility.
I think it's probably better.
You need to promote responsibility. You don't prescribe for social money to be used for social harm.
It might not be C-SPAN level. CNN level. Good job, George.
Check the speaker for his comments.
Okay. I think I did the thing I was supposed to do, which because I feel like I'm being trolled by someone sending me that video, but I appreciate that. I appreciate it. It did something. He said the Fox News show. You heard this one. Yeah, okay, aliens. I don't even know what that's a good emoticon, but I'm not sure I understand what it means. Are you flipping the table? Well, I mean, every time I feel like I'm having a lot of fun with this channel. I hope that you're having fun coming here because there's really no point to do it if we don't have a little bit of fun. It's I think fun can be worthwhile too. You know what might be good to look at for future videos? Videos of people giving advice on how to debate or argue with others. Yeah. I mean, that's probably true. I feel like the meta-ness of this, I wonder about that. If it gets too meta, like am I too in my own head? I feel like it's kind of nice to have something that's just where I kind of get surprised by it more and see how I react. But I might be surprised by those videos because I don't watch them very much. So maybe they have tons of surprise. There's a few YouTube channels I have subscribed to that are like professors of rhetoric. It's a little different vibe over there than what I'm doing here. But I don't want to just like shit on other people's thing that they're doing. But yeah, I probably don't agree. Usually. Emotional blackmail worked for me. Emotional blackmail was Nathan. I love this show, Nathan For You. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but at one point in his program, he's like always trying to come up with entrepreneurial business ideas. And at one point, he comes up with a diet program that's all about embarrassing people. It's so good. It's such a good episode. I fucking love that show. Wow, this has been real. I mean, this has been nice to end on like the Seder play. What's the function of the Seder play? You know, I'm sure there are a lot smarter people than me who have a lot more Greek than I can probably tell you a real answer. But I'm going to give you my kind of not very real answer. Aristotle, that idea of catharsis that we still say, oh, it's catharsis. I said it today. I wasn't only half kidding. And it's kind of a medical concept in Greek medicine, catharsis. Purging, because it's not, we're maybe a little over literal and thinking that all Greek medicine was based around the four humors. It wasn't all based around the four humors, but there was an idea that there were liquids in the body, fluids in the body, I should say, that and that the extraction of those fluids or the retention of them had something to do with health. But there were different schools. It wasn't all one view. And so catharsis is kind of an image of the balancing out of those dynamic principles of the body. And if we don't think of it less literally as just being fluids, we think about those dynamic principles, that there are different kinds of tensions that we are feeling and thinking in the field of meaning that is our conceivably future action or our memorably recent past. Kind of the stuff that we call the present, usually. That's alive to us. Sometimes we feel that it's kind of too much in one direction. And so a work of art, an image, a performance, music can change that for us. It can bring other things into focus. One of the things I think that the Seder play does is after there was this Dionysiac ritual, there were different rituals for the tragedies. You watch these tragedies, and Aristotle's theory is you'd experience intense pity and terror, which I sometimes do on this channel, though I'm still laughing during most of it, because it's hard to get the purely tragic or the purely comic today. I really feel like the tragic comic is the vibe. But when you do have the ability, like that tragic experience, it brings to the fore certain things that are always there in our experience, that we're always kind of aware of in the background, but they give us a moment to focus on those elements of our common experience of our mortality, of the limitedness of our power, of our lack of control over the meaning of our own actions. So then why have the Seder play? Because isn't that what we're trying to balance out? That we're kind of too focused in practical life on how much control we have. The tragedy balances us out. Well, I don't think so. It's more that the tragedy brings certain things into focus, but the Seder play suggests another element of what they mean. So after this kind of cycle of three plays, you'd have this kind of almost farcical kind of comedy that would follow it. That was loosely, but often, not always, but loosely thematically connected to the elements, to the myth that the tragedy had been about. I'm talking about Greek tragedy, obviously. And I feel like that's another kind of moment of a perspective on the same kind of material that shows you that the tragedy is still true. It doesn't go away. But it's also ridiculous. Because you don't take the perspective of being identified with the characters in the tragedy. They're supposed to be higher than you, according to Aristotle's theory. And so it's kind of an amplifying effect, like, oh my God, there's so much, like that's where life has lived at its highest peak, and even there it is damned and necessary. But in the Seder play, it's kind of not clear what your relationship is. That's one way I think about it. It's not clear what your relationship is to the characters. Are they higher to you or lower than you? And it's that moment of not knowing where you fit in the hierarchy. There's a kind of release of joy in that meaning of the kind of irony and the contingency of existence. It's part of the very beauty of what it means to be alive. And so that's all to say that this is actually quite a fitting ending to tonight's stream, which has a special meaning for me that these two figures represent two different perspectives on my own history. But I think they also have a kind of relationship to one another, which is this question of how do we speak when we're not necessarily in control of our persona. Allen Ginsberg wasn't in control of his persona in a very real way, because he said, I can't say my poem because it's being censored by the very medium that I appear on. And that was part of the context of the whole interview. And here we see the constraint that is happily accepted, the format of an intercollegiate debate tournament as a kind of creative, slightly silly modality of the creativity that I'm sure Allen Ginsberg probably wouldn't want to attend, but if he did, he would be smiling along with us, and maybe he would pull out his harmonium and play us a tune between the speeches. Censorship as invention, indeed. It's been so nice spending some time with all of you. I made some walnut and butterscotch bars tonight before I came on the stream, so I think I'm going to dip out and have a little indulgence that I made for myself, and I hope tonight's stream was an indulgence for you. And now get back to work, you fucking loser. What have you been doing with your time? Wasting it here, watching some other fucking loser talk about nonsense. Why aren't you writing code? Why aren't you making money? Why aren't you producing something? I've heard that LSD can really help you out with that. Till next time on the Reddit Prof stream. Later.